When my son of 40 years looked me in the eye and said nothing as his wife ordered me out of my own home, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. 2 weeks later, I was sitting across from my husband's lawyer with a secret that would change everything. That's when I realized family ties are sometimes just pretty nooses waiting to strangle you. If you're watching this, please subscribe and tell me in the comments if you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved with your whole heart. Trust me, you're not alone. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. 3 months ago, my husband Richard died in his sleep after 40 years of marriage. 4 decades of building a life together, raising our son William, and creating what I thought was an unbreakable family bond. How wrong I was. The day of Richard's funeral remains a blur in my memory. The black-clad figures, the hushed voices, the hollow condolences that bounced off me like raindrops on a window. I remember standing by his casket, my hand trembling as I placed a single white rose on top. "Goodbye, my love," I whispered, my voice cracking. William stood beside me, his arm around my shoulders, while his wife Vanessa dabbed at dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief. I should have seen it then, the calculating glint in her eyes, the way she surveyed the mourners as if taking inventory of witnesses. But grief had blinded me, wrapped me in a fog so thick I couldn't see the vultures circling. After the funeral, I moved through our mansion like a ghost. Every room held memories that now pierced me like shards of glass. Richard and I dancing in the living room to our wedding song on our anniversary. The kitchen where we'd share coffee every morning, his hand covering mine across the table. The garden where he'd surprise me with new rose bushes each spring, saying they could never compete with my beauty. Now I wandered these spaces alone, trailing my fingers across furniture that had witnessed our love story. William and Vanessa had moved in temporarily after the funeral. "To help you adjust, Mom," William had said, not quite meeting my eyes. I welcomed the company then, grateful not to face the emptiness alone. At first, they were solicitous, almost smotheringly so. Vanessa would bring me tea I hadn't asked for, hover while I drank it. "Is there anything you need, Eleanor?" she'd ask, her voice syrupy sweet. William would check on me throughout the day, asking if I'd eaten, if I'd taken my blood pressure medication. I mistook their surveillance for care. Then came the suggestions. "Mom, had you thought about downsizing? This place is so big for just one person," William mentioned casually over dinner one night, exactly 2 weeks after we'd buried his father. "Your father and I built this home together," I replied, setting down my fork. "Every corner holds a memory." "Memories can be packed up," Vanessa chimed in, cutting her chicken with precise movements. "And unpacked somewhere, cozier." "I'm perfectly comfortable here," I said firmly. The suggestions became more frequent, more insistent. They began moving things without asking, rearranging furniture, taking down photos of Richard and me, boxing up knickknacks I'd collected over decades. "We're just updating a bit," Vanessa explained when I found her removing the antique mirror Richard had given me on our 20th anniversary. "This old stuff is so depressing." I began finding my belongings in boxes in the hallway. My gardening tools disappeared from the shed. My cookbooks vanished from the kitchen shelves. When I confronted William, he sighed as if I were a difficult child. "Mom, we're trying to help you declutter. It's not healthy to cling to all these things." But they weren't things. They were pieces of my life, physical reminders of the love I'd shared with Richard. Each item they removed felt like they were erasing him, erasing us, all over again. Then came the renovations. Without consulting me, they brought in contractors to measure the master bedroom, my bedroom. "What's going on?" I asked, watching strange men walk through my most private space. "We're converting this into our suite," Vanessa answered, not even looking up from her phone. "The walk-in closet alone is bigger than our current bedroom." "But where will I sleep?" My voice sounded small, even to my own ears. William appeared then, putting his arm around me. "We've set up the guest room for you, Mom. It's cozy, and you won't have to climb as many stairs." The guest room was in the basement, dark, damp, and far from the garden I tended daily. I felt my throat tighten. "This is my home, William. Your father and I." "Dad's gone, Mom." He cut me off, his voice hardening. Things have to change now. That night, I cried into Richard's pillow, still faintly scented with his cologne. What's happening? I whispered to the empty side of the bed. What's happening to our son? The next morning, I went to the kitchen for my usual early cup of tea. Vanessa was already there, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I entered. I filled the kettle, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Would you like some tea? I offered. She finally glanced at me, her perfectly manicured eyebrow arching. Eleanor, we need to talk. The way she said my name, not Mom or even Mrs. Mitchell, sent a chill down my spine. I sat across from her, clutching my empty teacup. William and I have been patient, she began, setting her phone down deliberately. But it's been nearly a month now and you're still here. This is my home, I said quietly. Not anymore. Her smile was cold, reptilian. The will was clear. William inherited everything. The house, the accounts, all of it. My heart skipped a beat. That can't be right. Richard would never. Richard is dead, she snapped. Then, composing herself, she continued with that awful smile. As William's wife, I'm telling you it's time to make other arrangements. There are some lovely retirement communities in the area. I'm not leaving my home, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. That's when her mask slipped completely. Her eyes narrowed, her mouth twisted into an ugly sneer. Listen to me, you pathetic old woman. This isn't your house anymore. It's ours. And we want you gone. The kettle began to whistle, a high-pitched scream that matched the one building inside me. Neither of us moved to turn it off. My son would never allow this, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her laugh was like breaking glass. Your son? William and I have been planning this for years. Why do you think we never bought our own place? We were waiting for Richard to die so we could finally have what we deserve. The words hit me like physical blows. I stood up, my legs trembling. I want to speak to William. Be my guest, she said, leaning back in her chair. As if on cue, William walked into the kitchen, reaching around me to turn off the still screaming kettle. What's going on? I could hear this from upstairs. Your wife says I need to leave my home, I said, searching his face for some sign of the boy I'd raised. Tell her she's mistaken. William wouldn't meet my eyes. He moved to stand beside Vanessa, his hand on her shoulder. Mom, we've been trying to be gentle about this, but Vanessa's right. It's time for you to go. The world tilted beneath me. William, this is our family home. Your father and I. Dad left everything to me, he interrupted. The lawyer was clear about that. Which lawyer? I asked, suddenly alert. Richard's lawyer was Martin Goldsmith. He's handled our affairs for 30 years. William and Vanessa exchanged a quick glance. Dad switched to a new firm last year, William said. Said Goldsmith was getting too old. Another lie. Richard had mentioned no such thing, and he and Martin were old friends. Something wasn't right. I want to see the will, I demanded. That's private, Vanessa cut in. You don't have the right. He was my husband of 40 years. I have every right. William sighed heavily. Mom, this is exactly why we need to make changes. You're becoming argumentative, confused. It's not safe for you to live alone. I'm not confused, I said, my voice rising. And I'm not leaving my home. Vanessa stood up, so suddenly her chair toppled backward. Go live in the streets, old witch. This is our house now. The venom in her voice stunned me into silence. But what hurt more was William's reaction, or lack thereof. He simply stood there, silent, refusing to meet my gaze as his wife verbally assaulted his mother. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. A hardness, a resolve I didn't know I possessed. I remembered something important that they clearly hadn't considered. I straightened my spine, lifted my chin, and looked directly at Vanessa. Did you even read the will? I asked softly. The color drained from her face. Beside her, William stiffened. What are you talking about? He asked, finally looking at me. Nothing, I said, turning to leave the kitchen. I need to make a phone call. Mom, William called after me, but I kept walking. In the privacy of what was still my bedroom, I pulled out my old address book and found Martin Goldsmith's number. My fingers trembled as I dialed. Martin? It's Eleanor Mitchell. I need to see you. Today, if possible. It's about Richard's will. Martin's silence spoke volumes. Eleanor, he finally said, I've been trying to reach you for weeks. When you didn't come in after the funeral, I was worried. What do you mean? I never received any messages from you. Another pause. I left several. With William. My blood ran cold. I see. Martin, I think we have a problem. 2 hours later, I sat in Martin's office, the same office where Richard and I had signed our wills 15 years ago, updated them 10 years ago, and reviewed them just last year on our anniversary. The familiar surroundings calmed me, even as my world was collapsing. Eleanor, Martin said gently, placing a thick folder on the desk between us. Before we begin, I want to say how sorry I am about Richard. He was a good man, one of my dearest friends. I nodded, not trusting my voice. I also need to ask, did you really not know about the changes Richard made to his will last year? My heart stuttered. Changes? Martin frowned. He told me you had discussed everything at length, that you both agreed. Martin, I don't know what you're talking about. What changes? He opened the folder and slid a document across to me. This is the will Richard executed 11 months ago. He was quite specific about certain provisions. I began to read, my confusion mounting with each paragraph. According to this document, Richard had indeed left the house and the bulk of his assets, all $33 million, to William. But there were conditions attached, conditions that William and Vanessa had clearly chosen to ignore. There's a trust, I murmured, trying to make sense of the legal terminology. Yes, Martin confirmed. The house and assets are in a trust. William is the beneficiary, but with very specific conditions. I continued reading, and gradually, understanding dawned. He can evict me. Martin nodded. Not only can he not evict you, but the trust stipulates that you have the right to remain in the home for the rest of your life. Furthermore, a significant portion of the trust is designated for your care and comfort. I looked up at Martin, tears blurring my vision. Richard protected me. There's more, Martin said, his expression grave. There's a clause that if William or any member of his household attempts to remove you from the home or causes you distress, the trust reverts entirely to you, with William removed as beneficiary. I sat back, stunned. They don't know, I whispered. They haven't seen the real will. Martin's frown deepened. What do you mean? I told him everything. The mysterious new lawyer William had mentioned, the pressure to leave, Vanessa's venomous outburst that morning. Martin's face darkened with each word. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone. Eleanor, with your permission, I'd like to call the police. The police? I echoed, startled. What you're describing sounds like elder abuse, possibly fraud. If they're claiming Richard changed lawyers and left a different will, they may be attempting to defraud you of your rightful inheritance and home. The word fraud hung in the air between us. My own son, committing fraud against me? The pain was almost unbearable. Wait, I said, holding up a hand. I need to think. Martin set the phone down. Of course, this is a lot to process. It was more than a lot, it was devastating. Yet beneath the pain, something else was stirring. A sense of power. For weeks, I had felt helpless, at the mercy of William and Vanessa's cruelty. Now, knowledge had shifted that balance. I don't want to call the police, I decided. Not yet. William is still my son. Eleanor, Martin said gently, what they're doing is not just wrong, it's illegal. I know, I replied, new resolve strengthening my voice. But I want to handle this my way first. Martin studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. What do you want to do? I straightened in my chair. I want to go home. And then I want you to arrange a formal reading of the will, with William and Vanessa present. Are you sure? Martin asked. If they know you've discovered the truth, they might. They might what? I interrupted. Kick me out? Threaten me? They've already done that. No, I want to go home and act as if nothing has changed. Let them think they're winning a little longer. A smile touched Martin's lips. Richard always said you were the strong one. I felt tears threaten again. I never had to be, with him beside me. Well, he's still beside you in this, Martin said, tapping the will. He made very sure of that. As I drove home, my mind raced with questions. Had William forged a will? Or had he simply lied about its contents, assuming I would never check? And how long had this plan been brewing? Had he and Vanessa been waiting for years, watching Richard with calculating eyes, measuring his life against their greed? The thought made me physically ill. I had to pull over twice on the way home, overcome with waves of nausea. By the time I reached the mansion, my mansion, I had composed myself. I parked in the circular driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the grand facade. Richard and I had designed this house together, overseen every detail of its construction. We had raised William here, celebrated birthdays and holidays, weathered storms both literal and figurative. This was more than a structure of stone and wood. It was the physical manifestation of our love. And my son wanted to take it from me. I entered quietly, half expecting a confrontation. But the foyer was empty, the house silent. I made my way to the kitchen for a glass of water, my throat parched from crying. That's where I found the note, propped against the fruit bowl on the counter. Gone to dinner with the Prestons. Don't wait up. We need to continue our conversation tomorrow.
Foul.
The Prestons. Our old friends, Richard's friends, really. Had William told them his version of events? Was he spreading lies about me to our social circle? The thought sent a fresh wave of pain through me. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. Then, driven by a sudden impulse, I began to move through the house, really looking at what had changed in the weeks since Richard's death. In the living room, the changes were subtle but significant. Our family photos had been relegated to a single small table in the corner, while large abstract paintings I'd never seen before dominated the walls. Richard's favorite reading chair was gone, replaced by a sleek modern lounger that looked as uncomfortable as it was expensive. Upstairs, the changes were more dramatic. The master bedroom, my bedroom, had indeed been measured for renovation. Paint samples in bold, garish colors were taped to the walls. Richard's clothes were gone from the closet, and many of mine had been boxed up. But the most shocking discovery came when I entered William's childhood bedroom, which he and Vanessa had been using since moving in. There, spread across the bed, were papers, dozens of them. Financial statements, property assessments, investment portfolios. They had been going through our finances with a fine-tooth comb. And there, on top of the pile, was a document titled, Last Will and Testament of Richard James Mitchell. My hands shook as I picked it up. It took only a moment to recognize that this was not the will Martin had shown me. According to this document, Richard had left everything to William outright, with no trust, no provisions for my care, not even a sentimental bequest. It was cold, clinical, and utterly unlike my husband. It was also, I was certain, a forgery. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the document, making sure to capture every page. Then, heart pounding, I replaced it exactly as I had found it and backed out of the room. In a daze, I made my way to Richard's study, the one room that seemed untouched by William and Vanessa's renovations. Perhaps they considered it too sacred, or perhaps they simply hadn't gotten around to it yet. I sank into Richard's leather chair, running my hands over the worn armrests where his hands had rested for so many years. The familiar smell of his pipe tobacco lingered in the upholstery. "Oh, Richard," I whispered to the empty room. "What am I going to do?" As if in answer, my gaze fell on the antique desk calendar Richard had kept meticulously updated. The page was still turned to the day he died, as if time had stopped. But something about it caught my eye, a notation in his neat handwriting. 2:30 p.m., safe deposit box, Downtown First. Downtown First Bank. We had kept a safe deposit box there for decades. Richard had always handled that aspect of our affairs, insisting on maintaining the box even as most of our important documents moved to digital storage. What was in that box? And why had Richard visited it on the day he died? I checked the time, just past 7. The bank would be closed now, but I could go first thing in the morning. For now, I needed to prepare for William and Vanessa's return, to continue the charade that I was oblivious to their machinations. I made myself a simple dinner and ate in the kitchen, trying to ignore the changes they had made even there. The old farmhouse table where we had shared family meals for decades was gone, replaced by a cold marble island with uncomfortable bar stools. Another piece of my history erased. After dinner, I retreated to the guest room they had prepared for me. Not the basement room Vanessa had mentioned, but a small bedroom on the main floor that had once been used by Richard's mother when she visited. It was impersonal now, stripped of family photos, furnished with the barest essentials. The message was clear. I was a guest in my own home. I sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's revelations. My son, my only child, the boy I had carried in my body and nourished with my love, had been plotting against me, had forged a will, or at the very least lied about its contents, had been waiting for his father to die so he could claim what he saw as his due. And his wife, that viper, had been the architect of it all. I could see Vanessa's hand in this, the calculated cruelty, the meticulous planning. William had always been easily led, eager to please. Had she twisted him so completely that he could turn against his own mother? A sudden noise pulled me from these dark thoughts, the sound of the front door opening, voices in the foyer. They were back. I quickly turned off the light and slipped under the covers, feigning sleep. I wasn't ready to face them yet, not until I had seen what was in that safe deposit box. Their voices grew closer, moving past my door toward the kitchen. "Did you see her car outside?" William's voice, tense with concern. "Yes, she's back. Probably sulking in that room." Vanessa, dismissive. "I don't like this, Van. The way she asked about the will. Don't be stupid. She's bluffing. She has no idea. But if she talks to Goldsmith, she won't. And even if she does, it's her word against ours. Who's going to believe a grieving widow who's clearly becoming senile?" Their voices faded as they moved deeper into the house. I lay rigid under the covers, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they must hear it. Senile. They were going to claim I was senile. The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about the house, the money. They were prepared to destroy my reputation, my dignity, my very identity to get what they wanted. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake for hours, listening to them move about the house, their footsteps overhead as they retired to the master bedroom, my bedroom. Sometime after midnight, I heard a door open and close, then the sound of William's voice, though I couldn't make out the words. He was on the phone, his tone urgent. Who was he calling at this hour? The mysterious new lawyer they had invented? Someone else involved in their scheme? Dawn found me exhausted but resolute. I dressed carefully in one of my better outfits, a sage green suit Richard had always admired, and applied makeup with a steady hand. If they wanted to paint me as a doddering old woman, I would give them no ammunition. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when they appeared, both looking startled to find me up and dressed so early. "Mom," William said, his voice carefully neutral. "You're up early." "I have errands to run," I replied, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, one of the few personal items that had survived their purge of the kitchen. "Errands?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "What kind of errands?" I met her gaze steadily. "Personal ones." She opened her mouth to press further, but William placed a hand on her arm. "Mom, about yesterday?" Vanessa was upset. She didn't mean what she said. "Of course I meant it," Vanessa snapped, shaking off his hand. "Stop coddling her, William." We agreed. I sipped my coffee, watching them over the rim of my mug. Agreed to what, exactly? William shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, we need to talk about next steps. This house, it's too much for you. And with Dad gone." "I'm perfectly capable of managing without your father," I interrupted, setting down my mug with a decisive click. "I managed this household for 40 years, William. I'm not an invalid." "No one's saying you're an invalid," he backpedaled, shooting a warning glance at Vanessa. "But you have to admit, things have changed. Dad provided for us in his will. and, "Yes, your father's will." I cut in. "I'd very much like to see it." William's face paled slightly. "I told you, Mom. It's being handled by the new firm." "Which firm?" I pressed. "I'd like their contact information." "This is ridiculous," Vanessa burst out. "You don't get to demand anything. The will is clear. This house belongs to us now." I looked at her coldly. "Is that so?" Something in my tone must have alarmed William, because he stepped between us. "Mom, please. Let's not fight. We're family." The word family from his lips nearly broke me. But I held firm. "Yes, we are. Which is why I find it hard to believe that your father would leave me with nothing after 40 years of marriage." "He didn't leave you with nothing," William said quickly. "There's a stipend. For your care." "A stipend," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "How generous." Vanessa made a sound of disgust. "You should be grateful. He could have left it all to charity." I finished my coffee and rinsed the mug, taking my time. When I turned back to them, I kept my voice level. "I have an appointment this morning. We can continue this discussion later." "An appointment?" William echoed. "With who?" "That's my business," I replied, picking up my purse. "Don't you need a ride?" he asked, following me to the door. "I've been driving since before you were born, William," I reminded him. "I think I can manage." As I reached the door, Vanessa called after me, her voice sickly sweet again. "Eleanor, dear, perhaps William should go with you. You've been so forgetful lately." I turned to face her. "Have I? How strange." I remember everything quite clearly, like the combination to our safe deposit box at Downtown First, for example. The color drained from both their faces. "Safe deposit box." William stammered. "Yes," I said pleasantly. "Your father visited it the day he died. Isn't that interesting?" Without waiting for a response, I walked out the door, my heart hammering in my chest. I hadn't meant to reveal that I knew about the box, but Vanessa's condescension had pushed me over the edge. As I drove to the bank, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I had just shown my hand. If there was anything important in that safe deposit box, William and Vanessa would be desperate to get to it before I did. The downtown branch of First Bank was housed in a grand old building with marble columns and brass fixtures. Richard and I had been customers since before William was born. The manager, Mr. Peterson, greeted me by name as I entered. "Mrs. Mitchell, how lovely to see you." I was so sorry to hear about Richard. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson," I said, accepting his outstretched hand. "I actually came about our safe deposit box." His expression shifted subtly. "Yes, of course. Do you have your key?" I froze. The key. In all the chaos of the past 24 hours, I hadn't thought to look for the key. Richard had always handled that. I'm afraid I don't," I admitted. "It would have been among my husband's effects." Mr. Peterson's face grew grave. "I see. Well, there are procedures for accessing a box without a key, especially in cases of bereavement. But I should mention that your son was here yesterday inquiring about the same box." My blood ran cold. "My son? William was here?" "Yes, with a young woman, his wife, I presume. They had documentation indicating they were executors of Mr. Mitchell's estate. However, our records show that the box is in both your and Mr. Mitchell's names, with right of survivorship." Relief flooded through me. "So they couldn't access it?" "No, Mrs. Mitchell. Without your permission or a court order, they have no right to access the box." I nearly sagged with relief. "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. What do I need to do to access it now?" "Well, without the key, we'll need to drill the lock. There's a fee, and we'll need to verify your identity, of course. Do you have identification with you? And perhaps the original deed to the box, if you have it." I opened my purse, hands trembling slightly. I always carried my driver's license, but the deed to the box? I had no idea where that might be. But as I searched my purse, my fingers brushed against something in an inner pocket, something small and metal. I pulled it out and stared in disbelief. A key. Small, brass, with the bank's logo and a number engraved on it. Mrs. Mitchell? Mr. Peterson prompted. I have the key, I said, holding it up. I didn't realize. I must have put it in my purse after Richard's funeral. Or had Richard placed it there, knowing what was coming? Had he somehow anticipated his own death, or at least the aftermath? Mr. Peterson smiled. Excellent. If you'll follow me, we can access your box right away. He led me through a secure door into a room lined with metal boxes of various sizes. Using my key and his master key, he opened our box, a large one, near the bottom of the wall, and pulled out the metal container inside. I'll leave you in the private viewing room, he said, carrying the container to a small, windowless room equipped with a table and chairs. Take as much time as you need. When he left, closing the door behind him, I sat for a moment staring at the container. What would I find inside? More evidence of William and Vanessa's betrayal? Or something else entirely? With shaking hands, I opened the lid. The box contained several envelopes, a small jewelry case, and a USB drive. On top was an envelope with my name written in Richard's familiar handwriting. I opened it first, unfolding the letter inside. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have discovered that our son is not the man we raised him to be. I'm so sorry, my love. I had hoped I was wrong, that what I discovered was a misunderstanding, but I fear the worst. 6 months ago, I found William and Vanessa in my study, going through my papers when they thought the house was empty. I confronted them, and the things they said, Eleanor, they have been planning for my death. Counting on it. Vanessa spoke of renovations she wanted to make to their house. William talked about investment opportunities for his inheritance. When I reminded them that everything I owned was jointly held with you, that you would be taken care of if anything happened to me, Vanessa laughed. She said, and I quote, "Old people get confused. No one would be surprised if Eleanor signed things she didn't understand." I pretended to let it go, to believe their excuses. But I've been watching them, and I've taken precautions. The will Martin Goldsmith holds is the true one. I've left copies here, along with other evidence you may need. But most importantly, I've left you a letter to be opened only if you need it, if William and Vanessa try to take what is rightfully yours. It's in the sealed blue envelope marked Final Resort. I love you, Eleanor. You are the light of my life for 40 years. Be strong now. Be the fighter I know you are. All my love, Richard. Tears streamed down my face as I read and reread the letter. Richard had known. He had seen our son's betrayal coming and had prepared for it. I set the letter aside and examined the other contents of the box. The jewelry case contained family heirlooms, my mother's pearls, Richard's grandmother's diamond brooch, pieces I had thought were in our safe at home. The USB drive was labeled simply proof. I would need to find a computer to see what was on it. But it was the blue envelope marked Final Resort that drew my attention. It was sealed with wax, an old-fashioned touch that was so like Richard. I ran my finger over the seal, wondering what lay inside. Whatever it was, Richard had intended it as a last defense, a final protection. Did I need it now? Or should I wait? See how events unfolded? I decided to wait. I refolded Richard's letter and placed it in my purse, along with the USB drive and the blue envelope. The jewelry I left in the box. It would be safer here for now. As I drove home, my mind raced with possibilities. William and Vanessa had tried to access the safe deposit box yesterday after my conversation with Martin Goldsmith. They must be panicking, realizing their scheme was unraveling. What would they do next? Accelerate their plans? Try a different approach? Or would they abandon the scheme altogether, realizing they had been caught? I was about to find out. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw not only William and Vanessa's car, but also an unfamiliar luxury sedan parked in front of the house. They had company. But who? I entered the house to find voices coming from the living room, William's, Vanessa's, and a third voice I didn't recognize. Male, authoritative, with the measured cadence of someone used to commanding attention. "Mom," William called as I passed the doorway. "Come in here. There's someone we'd like you to meet." I paused, then turned to enter the living room. William and Vanessa sat on the sofa, tense smiles fixed on their faces. Across from them in Richard's favorite armchair, the one I thought they had disposed of, sat a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit. "Mom," William said, his voice overly bright, "this is Gregory Townsend. He's Dad's lawyer." The man stood, extending his hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, a pleasure to meet you. I'm so sorry for your loss." I didn't take his hand. "That's strange," I said calmly. "My husband's lawyer is Martin Goldsmith. Has been for 30 years. Townsend's smile didn't falter. "Richard came to me about a year ago, Mrs. Mitchell. He wanted to update his will, make some changes. Said he needed a fresh perspective." "I see," I replied, still not moving to shake his hand. "And where is your office, Mr. Townsend?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. "Downtown. The Henderson Building." "Suite number?" "Excuse me? Your suite number. In the Henderson Building." He hesitated just a fraction too long. "Suite 1200. I smiled. "That's interesting because the Henderson Building only has 10 floors. I know because Richard's first office was there, before he built the Mitchell Tower." The room went deathly silent. Townsend slowly lowered his hand, his expression hardening. "Mom," William began, but I cut him off. "Who is this man, William? And why is he pretending to be your father's lawyer?" Vanessa stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous. Greg is a respected attorney. Just because you don't remember meeting him." "I've never met this man in my life," I interrupted. "And neither had Richard. So I'll ask again. Who is he?" Townsend cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, I understand this is a difficult time for you. Grief can cloud our memories, make us forget things. My memory is crystal clear," I said, looking directly at William. "Unlike the loyalty of some." William flinched, as if I'd slapped him. "Mom, please. You're confused. Dad changed lawyers last year. He told me himself." "Another lie," I said softly. "How many have there been, William? How deep does this go?" Townsend stepped forward, his manner shifting from solicitous to intimidating. "Mrs. Mitchell, I have the legal documents right here that prove I represented your husband. I also have a psychiatric evaluation form that I strongly recommend you consider signing. Voluntarily, of course." "Psychiatric evaluation?" I echoed, disbelieving. "It's for your own good, Mom," William said, not meeting my eyes. "You haven't been yourself since Dad died. Forgetting things, getting confused. We're worried about you." So this was their new angle. Having failed to bully me out of my home, they were now going to try to have me declared incompetent. I felt a cold fury rise within me, clearing my mind like a sudden frost. "I see," I said, my voice deadly calm. "Well, before we proceed with that, I think there's something you should know." I reached into my purse and pulled out Richard's letter. Not the blue envelope, not yet, but the letter explaining what he had discovered. "My husband left me a letter," I said, holding it up but not offering to let them read it. "He knew what you were planning, William. He knew about Vanessa's renovations, about your investment plans for your inheritance. He knew, and he took precautions." The color drained from William's face. Beside him, Vanessa's eyes narrowed to slits. "What precautions?" she demanded. I smiled, channeling a confidence I didn't entirely feel. "Martin Goldsmith has the real will. The one with the trust that protects me and this house for the rest of my life. The one that reverts everything to me if you try to harm or evict me." "She's bluffing," Vanessa hissed to William. "She has to be." "Am I?" I countered. "Why don't we call Martin right now and find out?" William looked like he might be sick. "Mom, please. Can't we discuss this as a family? A family?" I repeated, the word like acid on my tongue. "Is that what we are?" Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I'm facing 3 strangers who are conspiring to steal my home and destroy my reputation. Townsend stepped forward, dropping all pretense of warmth. "Mrs. Mitchell, I advise you to think very carefully about your next move. Accusing your son of conspiracy is a serious matter, one that might further suggest your mental state is compromised." "Is that a threat, Mr. Townsend?" I asked. Because I think Martin Goldsmith and the police might be very interested in a man impersonating an attorney. For the first time, Townsend looked uncertain. He glanced at William, who had sunk back onto the sofa, head in his hands. "This isn't over," Vanessa spat, standing to face me. "You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming." I met her gaze steadily. "Neither do you, Vanessa. Neither do you." I turned to leave, but Townsend grabbed my arm. "The letter," he demanded. "Give it to me." His grip was painfully tight, his face contorted with anger. In that moment, I saw what this was really about, not just greed, but power. The power to take what wasn't theirs, to rewrite the narrative of our family, to erase me from my own life. "Let go of me," I said, my voice low but firm. "Give me the letter, you stupid old woman." William finally looked up. "Greg, stop. That's my mother." But Townsend wasn't listening. He twisted my arm, trying to pry the letter from my fingers. Pain shot through my shoulder. What happened next was pure instinct. I brought my knee up hard, connecting with Townsend's groin. He doubled over with a howl of pain, releasing my arm. "Mom," William exclaimed, jumping to his feet. I backed away, clutching the letter to my chest. "Stay away from me. All of you." Vanessa was helping Townsend to a chair, her face a mask of fury. "You'll regret that," she seethed. "We'll have you committed for this." Violent outbursts, delusions, paranoia. Classic signs of dementia. Her words sent a chill through me. They really were going to try to have me declared incompetent. And if they succeeded, even Richard's carefully crafted will might not protect me. I needed to get out of there, to think, to plan my next move. But where could I go? Who could I trust? As I backed toward the door, William approached slowly, hands raised as if I were a frightened animal. "Mom, please. Let's calm down and talk about this. We can work something out." "Like you worked out the fake will?" I shot back. "Or the impersonation of a lawyer. Which part should we calmly discuss?" "William." Pain flashed across his face. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he said quietly. "We just wanted." "What did you want?" I demanded, tears threatening again. "To throw your mother out on the street? To steal the home your father and I built? To erase 40 years of marriage like it meant nothing?" William had no answer. Behind him, Vanessa and Townsend were conferring in low, urgent voices. I had to leave, now. I turned and fled to my bedroom, the guest room they had relegated me to, and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I gathered a few essentials into a small overnight bag. Medication, a change of clothes, my wallet. Richard's letter and the blue envelope from the safe deposit box I tucked securely into my purse. Outside the door, I could hear raised voices, William and Vanessa arguing. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. This was far from over. I waited until their voices moved away, then slipped out of the bedroom and down the back stairs that led to the kitchen. From there, I could exit through the garden without being seen from the living room. My car keys. Where were my car keys? I always left them in a small dish by the back door, but the dish was gone. Another victim of Vanessa's renovations. I frantically searched my purse, then my pockets. Nothing. Had they taken my keys? Were they already implementing their plan to isolate and control me? Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but I forced it down. Think, Eleanor. Think. The spare key. Years ago, Richard had insisted we hide a spare key to each car on the property, just in case. Mine was in a small magnetic box attached to the underside of the garden bench. I moved as quietly as I could through the kitchen and out the back door. The garden, at least, remained largely untouched, probably because neither William nor Vanessa had any interest in maintaining it. I made my way to the stone bench beneath the old oak tree and reached underneath, feeling for the magnetic box. It was still there. Relief washed over me as my fingers closed around the small metal container. I extracted the key with trembling hands, then straightened up, and found myself face to face with Vanessa. She stood on the garden path, arms crossed, a cold smile on her perfect lips. "Going somewhere, Eleanor?" I clutched the key tightly in my fist. "I need some air." With an overnight bag? She nodded toward the bag I had set down beside the bench. I don't think so. Get out of my way, Vanessa, I said, summoning what courage I had left. She laughed, the sound brittle in the quiet garden. Or what? You'll attack me like you did Greg? That would just prove our point about your mental state. I took a step forward. I'm leaving. You can either move or I'll move you. Something in my voice or expression must have convinced her I meant it, because she took a half step back. But her smile remained cruel and confident. Go ahead, she said. Run away. It will just make it easier to convince a judge that you're unstable. Abandoning your home. Fleeing from concerned family members trying to help you. She was right, I realized with a sinking heart. Leaving now would play right into their hands. They would twist it, use it against me. But staying wasn't an option either. Not with Townsend there, not with their plan to have me committed clearly in motion. I needed help. Real help. I'm going to visit a friend, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'll be back tomorrow. Vanessa's smile widened. Of course you will. We'll be waiting. In fact, we might even have a little welcoming committee for you, medical professionals who can help with your condition. The threat couldn't have been clearer. If I left and returned, they would be ready with people who could forcibly commit me to a psychiatric facility. I had to think quickly. I'm calling Martin Goldsmith, I said, pulling out my phone. Right now. Vanessa's smile faltered slightly. Go ahead. It's Saturday. His office is closed. She was right about that too. But I dialed anyway, putting the phone on speaker so she could hear. To my surprise, and evident by Vanessa's expression, to hers as well, Martin answered on the third ring. Eleanor, is everything all right? Martin, I said, my voice shaking with relief. I need your help. I'm at the house, and they're trying to have me committed. There's a man here claiming to be Richard's lawyer, threatening me with psychiatric evaluations. Martin's voice sharpened. Who is there with you, Eleanor? William, Vanessa, and a man calling himself Gregory Townsend. Stay where you are, Martin said firmly. I'm calling the police, and I'm on my way. Don't sign anything. Don't go anywhere with them. Vanessa stepped forward, her face contorted with rage. Give me that phone. But I was already backing away, the phone clutched to my ear. Hurry, Martin, I said, then ended the call. Vanessa lunged for me, but I sidestepped her, decades of gardening having kept me more agile than she expected. William, she screamed. She's calling the police. I used her moment of distraction to dash past her, through the garden gate that led to the driveway. My car was still there, gleaming in the late morning sun. I fumbled with the key, hands shaking so badly, I could barely get it into the lock. Behind me, I heard the garden gate slam open. Footsteps on the gravel. Mom, stop. William's voice, closer than I expected. I finally got the door open and threw myself inside, locking it immediately. William appeared at the window, his face a mask of panic. Mom, please, he begged, pounding on the glass. You don't understand. We're trying to help you. I started the engine, refusing to look at him. Help me into an institution, you mean? It's not like that, he insisted. Vanessa's just upset. We can work this out. I finally turned to face him, my son, my only child. There's nothing to work out, William. You made your choice when you decided to throw me out of my home. His face crumpled. Mom. But I was already backing out of the driveway, my vision blurred with tears. In the rearview mirror, I saw Vanessa and Townsend emerge from the garden, William standing helplessly as I drove away. I had no clear destination in mind, only the desperate need to escape. But as I reached the end of our long driveway, I realized I didn't know where to go. Someone who would believe me, who would help me fight back. My oldest friend, Margaret. We had been through everything together, marriages, children, careers, losses. If anyone would stand by me now, it would be her. I pulled out my phone at a stoplight and called her number. Margaret? It's Eleanor. I need help. Can I come over? Her response was immediate and unquestioning. Of course, Sally. I'll put the kettle on. As I drove toward Margaret's house, I felt something stir within me, something beyond the fear and grief and betrayal. A spark of determination, of righteous anger. They thought I was a helpless old woman they could discard at will. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Behind me, my home, my life, receded in the distance. But ahead lay something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The game was not over. It was just beginning. Margaret lived in a modest bungalow across town, a place I'd visited hundreds of times over the decades of our friendship. As I pulled into her driveway, the familiar sight of her perfectly tended rose bushes brought a rush of emotion, so strong I had to sit in the car for a moment to compose myself. This was the first truly friendly shore I'd reached since Richard's death, the first place I knew I would be believed. I barely made it to the door before Margaret flung it open, her face etched with concern. She was 72, 3 years older than me, with a crown of silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Ellie," she gasped, taking in my tear-stained face and the small overnight bag clutched in my hand. "My God, what's happened?" The simple kindness in her voice broke something inside me. I collapsed into her arms, sobs racking my body as 40 years of maternal love crashed against the jagged rocks of betrayal. Margaret led me inside, one arm firmly around my shoulders, murmuring soothing nonsense as she guided me to her floral sofa. She pressed a cup of tea into my hands and sat beside me, patient but alert, like a guard dog sensing danger. "Start from the beginning," she said when my sobs finally subsided. "Everything."
So I did.
I told her about Richard's death, about William and Vanessa moving in, about their escalating campaign to push me out of my own home. I told her about Martin Goldsmith and the real will, about the safe deposit box and Richard's letter. And finally, about Townsend and their plan to have me declared incompetent. Margaret listened without interruption, her expression darkening with each revelation. When I finished, she sat in silence for a long moment, her teacup forgotten in her hand. "That snake," she finally said, her voice vibrating with anger. "I never trusted Vanessa, always hanging on William like he was made of gold, whispering in his ear." She set her cup down with a decisive click. "And William, the boy I've known since he was in diapers. How could he do this to you?" "I keep asking myself the same question," I said, exhaustion weighing my words. "Was it always there, this coldness? Did I miss it? Or did she change him?" Margaret shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. What matters is what we do next." She reached for the phone on her side table. "First, we're calling my nephew Brian. He's a lawyer, criminal defense, but he'll know how to handle this." "Martin is already on his way to the house," I reminded her. "He said he was calling the police." "Good." Margaret nodded approvingly. "But we need someone on your side right now, not just when Martin gets free. Brian can meet us at the police station." "The police station?" I echoed. "Yes," she said firmly. "We're filing a report. Attempted fraud at minimum. Elder abuse if they'll take it. We need an official record, especially if they try to claim you're incompetent." She paused, looking at me carefully. "That's what I would do. But it's your decision, Ellie. These are your family members we're talking about." Family. The word felt hollow now, stripped of meaning. Yet something still held me back from taking that final, irrevocable step of involving the police. Once that line was crossed, there would be no going back.
No reconciliation. No healing.
"Let me talk to Brian first," I said, "before we go to the police." Margaret nodded, already dialing. The conversation was brief and efficient, Margaret's clipped sentences conveying the urgency of the situation. When she hung up, she turned to me with grim satisfaction. "He'll be here in 20 minutes. And Ellie," she took my hand in hers, "you're staying here as long as you need to. That spare bedroom has your name on it." Gratitude washed over me, momentarily displacing the fear and betrayal. "Thank you, Margaret. I don't know what I would have done." "You would have figured it out," she interrupted firmly. "You're stronger than you think. Richard always said so." The mention of Richard brought fresh tears to my eyes. "I miss him so much, Margaret. Every morning I wake up and for a split second, I forget he's gone. Then it hits me all over again." Margaret squeezed my hand. I know. When Frank died, I used to set the table for two every night for months. Grief plays tricks on us. She paused, then added more gently. But Richard wouldn't want this to destroy you. He'd want you to fight. He knew, I whispered. He knew what they were planning. That's why he left the letter, the evidence. Then use it, Margaret said firmly. Honor him by standing up for yourself. A knock at the door interrupted us. Margaret rose to answer it, returning moments later with a man in his late 40s, dressed in a rumpled suit despite it being Saturday. Brian Reynolds had his aunt's sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, though his hair was still mostly brown instead of silver. Mrs. Mitchell, he greeted me, extending his hand. I'm sorry to meet under these circumstances. Thank you for coming so quickly, I said, shaking his hand. Aunt Margaret made it clear it was an emergency. He sat in the armchair across from us, placing his briefcase on the coffee table. She's given me the broad strokes, but I'd like to hear everything from you if you're up to it. So once again, I recounted the entire sordid tale. Brian listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, but mostly just absorbing the information. When I finished, he sat back, his expression grave. Mrs. Mitchell, what your son and daughter-in-law are attempting is not just morally reprehensible, it's criminal. Fraud, conspiracy, elder abuse, possibly even assault when this Townsend character grabbed you. He leaned forward. You have options. We can file police reports, seek restraining orders, initiate legal proceedings to validate the real will. But first, he held out his hand. May I see the letter from your husband? I hesitated, then reached into my purse and handed him Richard's letter from the safe deposit box. Brian read it carefully, his expression darkening. This is extremely valuable, he said when he finished. It establishes your husband's state of mind and his awareness of their intentions. But you mentioned there was more, a USB drive and another envelope. Yes, I confirmed, pulling out the blue envelope marked Final Resort. Richard said to open this only if I needed it, if William and Vanessa tried to take what's rightfully mine. Brian studied the sealed envelope. Given what's happened today, I'd say that condition has been met. I ran my finger over the wax seal, feeling as though I stood at a crossroads. Whatever was inside this envelope would change everything again. Was I ready? Open it, Ellie, Margaret urged gently. Richard meant it for exactly this moment. With a deep breath, I broke the seal and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was another letter and what appeared to be legal documents. I unfolded the letter first. My dearest Eleanor, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have been realized. William and Vanessa have moved against you, trying to take what is rightfully yours, what we built together over 40 years of marriage. What you hold in your hands now is your strongest protection. It is a codicil to my will, executed secretly with Martin after I discovered William and Vanessa's plans. This codicil explicitly disinherits William if he or Vanessa attempts to remove you from our home or otherwise harm you. But there's more. The USB drive contains recordings, conversations I had with William and Vanessa when they didn't know they were being recorded. Conversations where they discussed their plans for after my death, including their intentions regarding you. I installed recording devices in my study after finding them there that day. Michigan is a one-party consent state for recordings, so these are legally admissible. They will show their true characters in a way no one can deny. I didn't want to believe our son could betray us this way, Eleanor. I kept hoping I was wrong, that there was some explanation. But the recordings don't lie. Use these tools if you must. Protect yourself. But know that whatever happens, my love for you remains eternal. Always yours, Richard. I lowered the letter, my hands trembling. He recorded them. I whispered. He is proof. Brian was already examining the legal document. This is legitimate, he confirmed. A properly executed codicil to the will, with Martin Goldsmith as witness. It explicitly states that if William or any member of his household attempts to remove you from your home or causes you emotional or physical distress, he is disinherited completely. All assets would pass to you outright, with instructions for their disbursement after your death. Richard thought of everything, Margaret murmured. We need to hear those recordings, Brian said, reaching for the USB drive I'd placed on the table. Do you have a computer, Aunt Margaret? In the den, she nodded. We gathered around Margaret's desktop computer as Brian inserted the USB drive. The folder contained several audio files, each labeled with a date from the past year. The most recent was from just 2 weeks before Richard's death. Brian clicked on the first file, and Richard's voice filled the room. Just checking the system. This is Richard Mitchell, October 17th, first test of recording setup in my study. He clicked on another file, this one from November. Immediately, we heard William's voice. Dad's looking worse every day. The doctor said it could be any time now. Vanessa's voice replied, Don't get your hopes up. These old men can hang on forever. My grandfather was dying for 3 years. This is different, William insisted. His heart is failing. The last attack was worse than they told Mom. Well, we need to be ready when it happens. I've already got the renovation plans drawn up. That master suite is going to be amazing once we get it. Vanessa, Jesus. He's not even dead yet. But he will be soon. And then everything changes. No more waiting. No more pretending we don't know exactly what we want to do with this place. William's voice again, softer. What about Mom? She loves this house. She'll adjust. Old people always do. Besides, she'll be better off in a smaller place. Safer. I guess. Don't go soft on me now, Will. We've waited too long for this. Your father built an empire, and it's about to be yours.
Ours. Don't you want that?
Of course I do. I just nothing. She had him for 40 years. Now it's our turn. The recording ended, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I felt physically ill, hearing them discuss Richard's impending death so callously, planning to dispose of me like an unwanted piece of furniture. There's more, Brian said quietly, clicking on the file from 2 weeks before Richard's death. Richard's voice came first this time. William, Vanessa. Thank you for coming to my study. Please sit down. Vanessa. Is everything okay, Richard? You look tired. Should I call Eleanor? Richard. No, this conversation is just between us. I wanted to discuss the future. My future, which I'm afraid is limited, and yours, which I hope will be long and prosperous. William. Dad, don't talk like that. Richard. Let me finish, son. I'm not a fool. I know my health is failing. But I also know something else, something that's been weighing on me. A pause, then Richard continued. I know about your plans for after I'm gone. The renovations, the investments, the changes. William, stammering. What? What do you mean? Richard. I mean, I know you intend to push your mother out of our home. I know you've been waiting, counting the days until my death, so you can claim what you see as your inheritance. Vanessa, her voice sharp. That's ridiculous. Who's been filling your head with these lies? Eleanor? She's always been jealous of our relationship with you. Richard. No one told me anything. I heard it from your own lips, when you didn't know I was listening. And I've seen the renovation plans you left on your laptop, Vanessa. Plans that don't include any space for Eleanor. Silence, then William, quietly. Dad, we can explain. Richard. I don't want explanations. I want your word that you'll take care of your mother after I'm gone. That you'll respect her right to remain in our home for as long as she wishes. That you'll treat her with the dignity she deserves. Vanessa, her voice suddenly honey-sweet. Of course, Richard. We would never do anything to hurt Eleanor. She's family. Richard. Then you won't mind putting that in writing. I've had Martin draw up an amendment to my will, making your inheritance conditional on your treatment of Eleanor. Vanessa, sharper now. That's not necessary. Don't you trust us? Richard. Trust but verify. That's always been my policy in business. Why should it be any different with family?
William. Dad, come on.
We're not signing anything. This is insulting. Richard. Is it? Then prove me wrong. Show me I can trust you to do the right thing without legal compulsion. Vanessa. This is Eleanor's doing, isn't it? She's always tried to turn you against us. Richard, his voice hardening. No, Vanessa. This is entirely my doing, based on what I've seen and heard from you. My wife has been nothing but supportive of you both, despite your thinly veiled contempt for her. William, Dad. Richard, I'm not finished. I've made my decision. Either you sign this addendum, promising to respect Eleanor's rights, or I will change my will entirely. The choice is yours. Vanessa, her voice now openly hostile. You can't do that. Everything should go to your son, your blood. She's just a wife. She could remarry a week after you're gone. Richard, just a wife? Eleanor has been by my side for 40 years. She helped me build everything I have. Without her, there would be no fortune for you to covet. The recording ended abruptly there. I sat stunned, tears streaming down my face. To hear Richard defending me so fiercely, to know he had seen through their facade completely, it was both heartbreaking and vindicating. There's one more, Brian said softly, clicking on the final file. This recording was shorter, just Richard's voice, dated 3 days before his death. Eleanor, my love, if you're hearing this, then the worst has happened. William and Vanessa refused to sign the addendum. They stormed out of my study, Vanessa calling me a paranoid old man, William unable to look me in the eye. I've called Martin. We're changing the will tomorrow. You will be protected, my darling.
I promise you that.
They will not take our home from you. They will not erase our life together. I love you, Eleanor. I have always loved you, and I always will. The recording ended. I buried my face in my hands, overwhelmed by grief and love and rage. So many emotions I could barely breathe. These recordings, Brian said after a respectful pause, combined with the codicil and your testimony, are damning. If we take this to court, it becomes public. I interrupted, looking up at him through my tears. Everyone will know what my son did, what he was willing to do to his own mother. Brian nodded solemnly. That's true. Court proceedings would be a matter of public record. The shame of it, I whispered. Not just for me, but for Richard's memory. Our family name. Ellie, Margaret said gently, they brought this shame on themselves. You have nothing to be ashamed of. Before I could respond, my phone rang. Martin Goldsmith's name flashed on the screen. Martin, I answered, putting the phone on speaker. What happened? Eleanor. Martin's voice was tight with tension. Where are you? Are you safe? I'm at my friend Margaret's house. Yes, I'm safe. What's going on? I went to your house with the police. William and Vanessa were there, along with that Townsend character. They tried to convince the officers that you were having a mental health crisis, that you'd become paranoid and delusional since Richard's death. My blood ran cold. Did the police believe them? Not entirely. I showed them the real will, explained the situation. But without you there, it was difficult. They're treating it as a civil matter for now, a dispute over the will. But Eleanor, his voice dropped. They've filed for an emergency competency hearing. They're claiming you're a danger to yourself. A danger to myself? I repeated, incredulous. That's absurd. Of course it is. But they're painting a picture of a grieving widow who's becoming increasingly unstable. They told the police you attacked Townsend without provocation, that you've been having paranoid delusions about them trying to steal your home. But that's exactly what they are doing. I cried. I know that. But they've lined up a psychiatrist who's willing to testify that your behavior is consistent with the early stages of dementia exacerbated by grief. Brian leaned forward. Mr. Goldsmith, this is Brian Reynolds. I'm an attorney assisting Mrs. Mitchell. What court is the hearing in, and when? Probate court, Judge Harrison. Monday morning, 9 a.m. Martin paused. Who did you say you were again? Brian Reynolds. I'm Margaret Calloway's nephew. I practice criminal defense, but I'm advising Mrs. Mitchell temporarily until we can arrange more specialized representation. I see, Martin said, sounding slightly relieved.
Good.
She needs all the help she can get right now. These people are playing hardball. So are we, Brian replied grimly. Mrs. Mitchell has evidence you should know about. He quickly explained about the recordings and the codicil. There was a moment of silence, then Martin said, "Richard told me he had evidence, but he didn't share the details. Said it was better if I didn't know everything, in case things got ugly." Another pause. "And now they have. What do we do now?" I asked, fear creeping back into my voice. "They're trying to have me declared incompetent before we can even present the will in court." "We fight," Martin said simply. "I'll file an emergency motion to dismiss their petition in the morning. But Eleanor, you need to be at that hearing on Monday. Judge Harrison needs to see you, speak to you, assess your competence for himself." "I'll be there," I promised. "And Eleanor," Martin's voice softened, "be careful. Don't go home. Not until this is resolved. If they're willing to go this far, there's no telling what else they might do." After we hung up, I sat in silence, trying to process this latest development. They were actually trying to have me declared incompetent, to strip me of my legal rights, my autonomy. My own son. "I can't believe this is happening," I murmured. "Unfortunately, it's not uncommon," Brian said, his expression grim. "Elder abuse often takes this form, financial exploitation disguised as concern. The good news is we have strong evidence to counter their claims." "The recordings," Margaret nodded. "And the codicil," Brian added. "But most importantly, Mrs. Mitchell herself. Judge Harrison will see that she's perfectly competent." I wasn't so sure. I felt anything but competent at that moment. Exhausted, overwhelmed, heartbroken. But I knew I had to pull myself together. This wasn't just about the house or the money anymore. It was about my freedom, my dignity, my very identity. "I need to prepare," I said, straightening my shoulders. "If I'm going to face a judge on Monday, I need to be at my best." Brian nodded approvingly. "That's the right attitude. And I'll help you prepare. We'll go over likely questions, practice your responses. By Monday morning, you'll be ready." For the first time since fleeing my home, I felt a glimmer of hope. I had allies, evidence, a plan. But as the day wore on and we strategized for the hearing, a nagging question kept resurfacing in my mind. How had it come to this? What had transformed my loving son into someone capable of such calculation, such cruelty? Later that evening, after Brian had left with copies of all our evidence, promising to return Sunday afternoon for more preparation, I sat with Margaret in her small sunroom. The setting sun cast long shadows across the floor, a visual echo of the dark thoughts stretching through my mind. "I keep thinking about William as a little boy," I said softly. "His first day of school, how he clung to my hand at the classroom door. The Christmas he saved his allowance for months to buy me a silver bracelet. The way he looked after Richard had his first heart attack, so frightened of losing his father." I looked up at Margaret, eyes brimming with tears. "Where did that boy go, Margaret? How did he become this stranger?" Margaret sighed, reaching across to take my hand. "People change, Ellie. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. But I don't think William is the architect of this cruelty." "Vanessa," I nodded. "I know she's influencing him. But still, he's a grown man. He's making his own choices." "Is he?" Margaret mused. "I've watched them together for years. The way she controls him, manipulates him. It's subtle, but it's constant. A word here, a look there. Isolating him from friends who don't serve her purposes. Always whispering in his ear. But to turn against his own mother? To try to throw me out on the street? There has to be more to it than just Vanessa's influence." Margaret was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you remember when William was in college, that summer he interned at Richard's company?" I nodded. "Of course. Richard was so proud to have him there." "William came to see me during that time," Margaret said slowly. "He was upset. Said Richard was too demanding, too critical. That nothing he did was ever good enough." This was news to me. "He never said anything to me about that. He wouldn't have wanted to hurt you. But he told me he felt like he could never measure up to Richard's expectations. That he'd always be a disappointment." Margaret paused. "I think that summer changed something in him. He stopped trying to please Richard and started trying to compete with him instead. To prove he could be just as successful, just as powerful." I thought back to that time, trying to see it through this new lens. William had been different after that summer, more withdrawn at home, more focused on making money. He'd switched his major from literature to business, started dressing differently, talking differently. And the following year, he'd met Vanessa. She saw his vulnerability. I realized aloud. His need to prove himself. And she's been exploiting it ever since. I think so, Margaret agreed. She found his weakness and turned it into a weapon, against Richard, against you, eventually against William himself. Because make no mistake, Ellie, William is a victim in this too, even if he's also a perpetrator. The thought brought me no comfort. If anything, it made the situation more tragic. Not just my loss, but William's too, the loss of the man he could have been, should have been. What do I do with this knowledge? I asked. Even if you're right, it doesn't change what's happening now. It doesn't stop them from trying to destroy me.
No, Margaret conceded.
But it might help you find a path forward after all this is over. A way to reach the son who's still in there somewhere, buried under years of resentment and Vanessa's manipulation. I wasn't sure I wanted to reach him anymore. The wound was too raw, the betrayal too complete. But I nodded anyway, grateful for Margaret's perspective. Before I could respond further, my phone chimed with a text message. I glanced at it, expecting it to be from Brian or Martin with updates about Monday's hearing. Instead, it was from a number I didn't recognize. I know what William and Vanessa are doing. I have more evidence. Meet me tomorrow, 10 a.m., Riverside Park near the boathouse.
Come alone.
I showed the message to Margaret, my heart racing. Who could this be? I don't like it, Margaret frowned. It could be a trap. A way to get you alone, away from your support system. Or it could be someone with genuine information, I countered. Someone from their social circle who's witnessed their behavior, or maybe one of the household staff. Then why all the cloak and dagger? Why not just call you directly? She had a point. The anonymous text, the demand to come alone, it felt ominous. I should tell Brian about this, I decided. Get his advice. Good idea, Margaret agreed. And regardless of what he says, you're not going anywhere alone tomorrow. If you decide to meet this mystery person, I'm coming with you. I'll stay out of sight, but I'll be there. Her fierce protectiveness brought tears to my eyes. What would I do without you, Margaret? Let's hope you never have to find out, she replied with a gentle smile. Now, let's call Brian. Brian's reaction to the text was immediate and emphatic. Don't go. This has all the hallmarks of a setup. What kind of setup? I asked. What could they possibly gain by luring me to a public park? Several things, Brian replied. They could be trying to show that you're paranoid and delusional by getting you to meet a non-existent informant. Or they could be setting up a situation where you appear unstable, perhaps an argument they can record and edit to make you look irrational. At minimum, they're trying to get you away from your support system right before the hearing. His logic was persuasive, but something about the message nagged at me. What if it's legitimate? What if someone really does have evidence that could help us? Brian was quiet for a moment. If you're determined to go, at least let me arrange for a private investigator to be there. Someone who can observe from a distance, document everything, and intervene if necessary. I can do that, Margaret offered. I'll stay back, keep an eye on things. With all due respect, Mrs. Calloway, this requires professional expertise, Brian said gently. I have a colleague who specializes in this kind of surveillance. She can blend into the background in a way that, well, in a way that a 72-year-old woman with silver hair can't. Margaret finished dryly. Fair point. So we're agreed? Brian confirmed. If, and that's a big if, Mrs. Mitchell decides to go, my investigator will be there to monitor the situation. Agreed, I said, though uncertainty still churned in my stomach. I'll decide in the morning. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned in Margaret's guest room, my mind racing with questions.
Who had sent the text?
What evidence could they possibly have? Was it worth the risk to find out? By dawn, I had made my decision. I would go, but with precautions. Brian's investigator would be there. Margaret would wait in a nearby cafe, and I would meet this mysterious informant in a public place where I could easily call for help if needed. I called Brian early to set the plan in motion, then tried to eat the breakfast Margaret prepared, though anxiety had stolen my appetite. You don't have to do this, Margaret reminded me as I picked at my toast. We already have strong evidence for tomorrow's hearing. I know, I acknowledged. But if there's more, something that could put this to rest once and for all. I left the thought unfinished. By 9:30, we were at Riverside Park. Margaret reluctantly headed to a cafe with a view of the boathouse, while I made my way to the meeting spot. Brian had texted that his investigator, a woman named Diana, was already in position, though I had no idea what she looked like or where exactly she was watching from. The park was busy for a Sunday morning, joggers, dog walkers, families with children. The public setting should have been reassuring, but my nerves were strung tight as I found a bench near the boathouse and sat down to wait. At precisely 10 a.m., a shadow fell across the bench. I looked up, expecting a stranger. Instead, I found myself staring into the face of my son's executive assistant, Caroline Davis. Mrs. Mitchell, she said quietly, glancing around nervously. Thank you for coming. Caroline? I was genuinely surprised. You're the one who texted me? She nodded, perching tensely on the edge of the bench. Caroline had worked for William for 5 years, a capable, discreet woman in her 30s who had always been unfailingly polite during our limited interactions. I wasn't sure you'd come, she said, but I had to try. What they're doing to you, it's wrong. You know about that? I asked cautiously. I know more than I should, she admitted. William isn't always careful about what he says around me. And Vanessa treats me like I'm invisible, so she speaks freely when I'm in the room. She reached into her purse and withdrew a small digital recorder, like on this recording from William's office on Friday. She pressed play, and Vanessa's voice emerged, crystal clear. The lawyer says we need to move quickly. If we can get the competency hearing before the will is formally presented in court, we can invalidate any claims she makes. William's voice hesitant. I don't know, Van. Using a psychiatric hold seems extreme. She's my mother. Your mother who's standing between us and $33 million, Vanessa snapped. Besides, it's not like we're lying. She is acting erratically, fleeing the house, attacking Greg, making wild accusations. Classic signs of paranoia, just like Dr. Mercer will testify. We're paying Mercer to say what we want him to say, William pointed out. That's not exactly ethical. Ethics don't pay for the yacht you've been eyeing, Will, or the vacation home in Aspen, or any of the other things we've been planning for years. A pause. Don't go soft on me now. We're so close. Once she's declared incompetent, you'll be appointed her guardian. We can move her to that facility in Ohio, out of everyone's way, and finally start living the life we deserve. Ohio. William sounded shocked. We discussed a local retirement community, not shipping her out of state. The Ohio place specializes in dementia patients. It makes our case stronger. Besides, do you really want her nearby, with her old friends constantly visiting, listening to her complaints? This way, it's a clean break. The recording ended. I sat frozen, the blood draining from my face. Ohio. They were planning to ship me off to some facility in another state, away from everyone I knew, everyone who might help me. There's more, Caroline said, handing me the recorder. I've been documenting their conversations for weeks, ever since I overheard them planning to challenge your competency. It didn't seem right, the things they were saying about you. Why are you doing this? I asked, clutching the recorder like a lifeline. You work for William. This could cost you your job. Caroline was quiet for a moment. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She sacrificed everything to give me a good life. 2 years ago, she started showing signs of memory loss. My uncle, her son, immediately tried to have her declared incompetent so he could control her assets. Her eyes hardened. I fought him and won. She's in an excellent care facility now, one she chose, near me so I can visit every day. So this is personal for you, I realized. Very, she confirmed. What they're trying to do to you is exactly what my uncle tried to do to my grandmother. I couldn't stop it then without speaking up, and I can't stay silent now. I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. William could make things very difficult for you if he finds out. He already has, she said with a tight smile. I gave my notice on Friday. Told him I'd been offered a better position elsewhere, which isn't actually a lie. I start at Morton Financial next month. Richard's old competitor, I noted with a hint of genuine amusement, the first I'd felt in days. Ironic, isn't it? She glanced at her watch. I should go. William and Vanessa think I'm at a yoga class, but I wouldn't put it past them to check. She nodded at the recorder. There are 12 recordings on there, all from the past 3 weeks. The most damning is probably the one where they discuss paying Dr. Mercer for his testimony. Caroline, I said as she stood to leave. Thank you. I don't have words. Just win tomorrow, she replied simply. Don't let them do this to you. She hesitated, then added, and Mrs. Mitchell? For what it's worth, I'm sorry. William wasn't always like this. When I first started working for him, he spoke of you and his father with such respect, such love. Something changed in the last few years. Something, I repeated softly. Or someone. She nodded, understanding my meaning. Be careful. She's not stable. The more cornered she feels, the more dangerous she becomes. With that ominous warning, Caroline walked away, soon disappearing among the Sunday morning parkgoers. I sat on the bench for several minutes, the recorder clutched in my hand, trying to process what I'd just learned. Not only were they trying to have me declared incompetent, but they planned to ship me off to another state, far from friends and support. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. As I finally rose to meet Margaret at the cafe, a woman jogging past slowed momentarily. Diana, she said under her breath. Brian's investigator. All clear, but you're being followed. Black SUV, parked on Riverside Drive. Driver matches the description of Gregory Townsend. Before I could respond, she continued her jog, leaving me rooted to the spot in sudden fear. Townsend was here? Watching me? I hurried toward the cafe, fighting the urge to look over my shoulder. If Townsend was indeed following me, I didn't want to let him know I was aware of his presence. Margaret was waiting anxiously, half risen from her seat as I entered the cafe. Ellie, what happened? Who was it? William's assistant, Caroline. I replied, sliding into the chair across from her and keeping my voice low. She brought recordings, conversations between William and Vanessa about their plans for me. It's worse than we thought, Margaret. They're planning to ship me off to a facility in Ohio once William is appointed my guardian. Margaret's face darkened with anger. Over my dead body. That's not all. I continued, leaning closer. Brian's investigator just told me we're being followed. Townsend is parked outside in a black SUV. That's Snake, Margaret hissed. What's he doing here? Probably making sure I don't meet with anyone who might help me before tomorrow's hearing, I guessed. Or gathering more evidence of my supposed paranoia and instability. We need to call Brian, Margaret decided, already reaching for her phone. Brian's response was immediate and decisive. Stay where you are. I'm sending Diana in to escort you out through the kitchen. I'll have a car waiting in the alley behind the cafe. Don't confront Townsend. Don't even look in his direction. 20 minutes later, Margaret and I were safely in Brian's car, heading back to her house. The digital recorder was secure in my purse, a powerful new weapon in our arsenal. This changes everything, Brian said as we drove. These recordings, combined with the ones Richard made, destroy their narrative completely. There's no way Judge Harrison will grant their petition for guardianship once he hears this evidence. But will he hear it? I asked anxiously. Can we be sure they won't find some procedural reason to exclude it? Martin and I will make sure it's admissible, Brian assured me. We've been working on this all weekend. The case we're building is solid. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to feel genuine hope. The evidence was mounting, our legal team was prepared, and tomorrow I would finally have my day in court. But as we pulled up to Margaret's house, a police cruiser was parked in the driveway, and officers standing on the porch. Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell, the officer called as we exited the car. I have a warrant for your arrest. Brian stepped forward immediately. On what charges, officer? The officer consulted his paperwork. Assault and battery against Gregory Townsend, threatening behavior and trespassing. Trespassing, I echoed in disbelief. On my own property. According to the warrant, the property belongs to William Mitchell, the officer replied, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry, ma'am, but I need to take you in. Brian's face had gone hard. This is their play, he said under his breath. Get you arrested right before the competency hearing, so you show up in custody, looking exactly like the unstable person they're painting you to be. What do we do? I whispered, panic rising in my throat. Cooperate fully, he advised. I'll follow you to the station and have you out within hours. We'll make sure you're present for tomorrow's hearing, and we'll add this to the evidence of their malicious intent. As the officer approached with handcuffs, a car screeched to a halt at the curb. Martin Goldsmith emerged, moving with surprising speed for a man his age. Officer, wait, he called, waving a document. I have an emergency stay from Judge Harrison himself, preventing any arrest or detention of Eleanor Mitchell until after tomorrow's competency hearing. The officer paused, examining the document Martin thrust into his hands. This appears to be in order, he said finally, looking relieved. But I'll need to call it in to verify. While the officer made his call, Martin explained in hurried whispers, I anticipated something like this. They're getting desperate. The stay is temporary, just until the hearing, but it should prevent them from using the legal system to manipulate your appearance in court. The officer returned, handing the document back to Martin. Everything checks out. The arrest warrant is stayed until after tomorrow's hearing.
He tipped his hat to me.
Sorry for the disturbance, ma'am. As the police cruiser pulled away, I sagged against the car, the adrenaline of the moment leaving me weak-kneed and trembling. They really will stop at nothing, I murmured. Which tells us they're scared, Brian pointed out. They know we have a strong case, and they're resorting to increasingly desperate measures. All the more reason to be extremely careful until the hearing, Martin added. They've shown they're willing to use any means necessary to prevent you from appearing in court tomorrow. I won't let them win, I said, straightening my shoulders despite my exhaustion. Not after everything they've done. Back inside Margaret's house, we gathered around her dining table, reviewing our evidence one final time. The recordings from Richard, the codicil, the recordings from Caroline, documentation of their attempts to have me arrested. It formed a compelling narrative of calculated malice and greed. Judge Harrison is fair, Martin assured me. Once he sees this evidence, there's no way he'll grant their petition. In fact, he's likely to dismiss it with prejudice and refer them for criminal investigation. The thought brought me little comfort. Even if we won tomorrow, when we won tomorrow, the damage had been done. My son had revealed himself as someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. Our family was shattered beyond repair. And Richard was still gone, leaving me to face this nightmare alone. As if reading my thoughts, Margaret placed a hand over mine. One day at a time, Ellie. Let's get through tomorrow. The rest will sort itself out. I nodded, too emotionally exhausted for words. Tomorrow would indeed be the culmination of this ordeal, one way or another. Later that night, as I prepared for bed in Margaret's guest room, my phone chimed with a text message. I approached it warily, half expecting another threat or manipulation. Instead, it was from William's personal number. Mom, we need to talk. Alone. Meet me at Dad's grave tomorrow, 7 a.m., before the hearing.
Please.
There are things you don't understand. I stared at the message, emotions warring within me. Was this another trap? Or was my son finally reaching out, separate from Vanessa's influence? Either way, it was a risk I couldn't afford to take, not with the hearing only hours away. I showed the message to Margaret and Brian, who had stayed late to finalize our preparations. Absolutely not, Brian said immediately. This is clearly an attempt to prevent you from attending the hearing. I agree, Margaret nodded. If William truly wants to talk, he can do so after the hearing, in the presence of your attorneys. They were right, of course. I knew that logically. But emotionally, a small part of me still hoped there was an explanation, some reason that would make sense of my son's betrayal. I typed a reply. Whatever you have to say can be said in court tomorrow. I'll see you there. His response came seconds later. "You'll regret this, Mom. I'm trying to help you." Help me? After everything he'd done? The audacity was breathtaking. I turned off my phone without replying, unwilling to be drawn into further manipulation on the eve of the hearing. Tomorrow would bring resolution one way or another. I needed to be rested, clear-headed, and strong. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling in Margaret's guest room, I thought of Richard. What would he say if he could see us now? His wife and his son, preparing to face off in court over the empire he had built, the legacy he had left behind. "I'm doing what you asked, Richard," I whispered into the darkness. "I'm fighting. I'm protecting what's ours. But, oh, how I wish you were here to fight beside me." Sleep came eventually, but it was fitful and filled with dreams of courtrooms and accusations, of William as a child crying for my help, of Vanessa's cold smile as she locked me away in some distant facility. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, the weight of the coming day already pressing down on me. As I dressed carefully in a conservative navy suit that Margaret had lent me, I studied my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed older, wearier than the woman I remembered being just weeks ago. But there was something else in her eyes too, a steely resolve, a quiet dignity. I would face this day, and whatever it brought, with my head held high. Margaret drove me to the courthouse, Brian following in his car. Martin would meet us there. As we approached the imposing stone building, I spotted a news van parked nearby. "The press is here," I noted with dismay. How did they find out? High-profile family, allegations of elder abuse, millions at stake, Brian said grimly as he joined us on the courthouse steps. It was bound to attract attention eventually. "Just keep walking," Margaret advised, taking my arm. "Don't look at the cameras. Don't answer any questions." We made our way inside, ignoring the reporters who called out questions as we passed. The courtroom was on the third floor, a solemn space of dark wood and hushed voices. Martin was already there, organizing papers at the council table. "Right on time," he said with an approving nod. "Judge Harrison is known for starting precisely at 9. As I took my seat beside Martin, the courtroom doors opened again. William entered, flanked by Vanessa and a distinguished-looking man I assumed was their attorney. Gregory Townsend followed close behind, a smug expression on his face. William met my eyes briefly, then looked away. Was that guilt I saw in his face, or just calculation? I couldn't tell anymore. Vanessa, by contrast, stared directly at me, her expression cold and confident. She clearly believed they would win today. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Harrison entered, a tall, lean man with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. He took his seat at the bench and surveyed the courtroom with an expression that revealed nothing of his thoughts. "Mitchell versus Mitchell," he announced, glancing at the papers before him. "Petition for determination of incapacity and appointment of guardian." He looked up, his gaze moving between the two tables. "I understand this is an emergency hearing requested by the petitioner, William Mitchell." William's attorney stood. "Yes, Your Honor. My client is deeply concerned about his mother's rapidly deteriorating mental state and believes immediate intervention is necessary for her safety and well-being." Judge Harrison nodded, then turned to our table. "And you represent Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell?" Martin rose. "Yes, Your Honor. Martin Goldsmith, representing Mrs. Mitchell. We categorically deny the allegations and contend that this petition is part of a systematic attempt to defraud Mrs. Mitchell of her rightful inheritance." The judge's eyebrows rose slightly. "Those are serious allegations, Mr. Goldsmith." "We have serious evidence, Your Honor," Martin replied firmly. "Very well." Judge Harrison looked directly at me, his gaze assessing but not unkind. "Mrs. Mitchell, these proceedings will determine whether you are capable of managing your own affairs. Do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" I stood, meeting his gaze steadily. "I do, Your Honor." "And you wish to contest your son's petition?" "With every fiber of my being, Your Honor." A flicker of something, approval? Amusement, crossed his face before he resumed his neutral expression. "Then let's proceed." Mr. Lewis, he addressed William's attorney, present your case. As Lewis began outlining their allegations, my supposed paranoia, erratic behavior, violent outbursts, and confusion, I sat straight-backed and still, determined to project the image of a woman fully in control of her faculties. Across the aisle, William avoided my gaze, while Vanessa watched the proceedings with the intensity of a predator tracking prey. When Lewis called Dr. Mercer to the stand, the psychiatrist they had paid to testify against me, according to Caroline's recording, I felt a surge of anger. This man had never even met me, yet he was prepared to testify that I was incompetent based solely on William and Vanessa's descriptions of my behavior. Martin must have sensed my tension, because he patted my hand reassuringly. Don't worry, he whispered. We're about to turn this circus around. Dr. Mercer took the stand, a distinguished-looking man with a carefully cultivated air of authority. He testified at length about the symptoms of dementia, particularly when exacerbated by grief, and how my reported behavior aligned with these symptoms. And have you personally examined Mrs. Mitchell? Martin asked when his turn for cross-examination came. Dr. Mercer shifted uncomfortably. No, but I've reviewed detailed descriptions of her behavior provided by her son and daughter-in-law. I see, Martin said mildly. So your professional opinion about Mrs. Mitchell's mental state is based entirely on second-hand accounts provided by the very people who stand to gain control of her assets if she's declared incompetent. Objection. Lewis called. Counsel is impugning the witness's professional integrity. I'm merely clarifying the basis for his expert opinion, Martin countered smoothly. Overruled. Judge Harrison decided. The witness will answer the question. Dr. Mercer cleared his throat. My assessment is based on the information available to me. In cases of suspected dementia, family members' observations are often the most reliable early indicators. When those family members are acting in good faith, perhaps, Martin agreed. But what if they're not? What if they have a financial motive to exaggerate or even fabricate symptoms? Objection. Lewis was on his feet again. Counsel is making accusations without foundation. Your Honor, Martin said calmly, if you'll allow me to present evidence, I believe the foundation will become quite clear. Judge Harrison studied Martin for a moment, then nodded. Proceed, Mr. Goldsmith. Martin turned back to Dr. Mercer. Doctor, would your assessment change if you heard recordings of Mr. and Mrs. William Mitchell discussing their plans to have Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell declared incompetent specifically to gain control of her assets, including conversations about paying you for favorable testimony? The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Dr. Mercer's face drained of color. Across the aisle, Vanessa clutched William's arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Objection. Lewis shouted over the noise. These alleged recordings, if they exist, have not been properly submitted as evidence. Actually, they have, Brian interjected, rising from his seat behind our table. Along with Mrs. Mitchell's response to the petition, filed this morning. Judge Harrison banged his gavel, restoring order. Mr. Lewis, did you not review the respondent's filings before this hearing? Lewis looked flustered. Your Honor, they were filed less than 2 hours ago. We haven't had time to. That's unfortunate for your clients, Judge Harrison interrupted, but not grounds for excluding properly filed evidence. He turned to Martin. You may present these recordings, Mr. Goldsmith. As Martin set up the equipment to play Caroline's recordings, I glanced across at William and Vanessa. William looked physically ill, while Vanessa's expression had transformed from confidence to barely contained fury. She leaned over to whisper something to William, who shook his head minutely in response. The recording began to play, Vanessa's voice filling the courtroom, discussing their plans to have me declared incompetent, to move me to a facility in Ohio, to pay Dr. Mercer for favorable testimony. As her words echoed through the courtroom, Dr. Mercer's face grew increasingly pale. When the recording ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Harrison turned to Dr. Mercer. Doctor, I'll ask you again. Would your assessment change in light of this new information? Dr. Mercer swallowed hard. Your Honor, I was not aware of any financial arrangement beyond my standard consulting fee. If what we just heard is accurate, then yes, it would cause me to question the reliability of the information I was provided. Thank you, doctor. You may step down. As Dr. Mercer practically fled the witness stand, Judge Harrison turned to William's attorney. Mr. Lewis, do you have any other witnesses? Lewis conferred hastily with William and Vanessa, then stood. Your Honor, in light of this unexpected evidence, my clients would like to request a continuance to prepare a proper response. Denied, Judge Harrison said flatly. This was filed as an emergency petition at your client's insistence. Either proceed with your case now or withdraw the petition. Lewis looked back at William, who nodded resignedly. Your Honor, we withdraw the petition at this time. A wave of relief washed over me, but Judge Harrison wasn't finished. Before I dismiss this case, I want to be clear about what has happened here today. Based on the evidence presented, it appears that this petition was filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell's welfare, but as part of a calculated attempt to gain control of her assets. He turned his stern gaze directly on William and Vanessa. Such abuse of the legal system is not only unethical, but potentially criminal. I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible charges of attempted fraud, perjury, and elder abuse. Vanessa's face contorted with rage. This is ridiculous. She's the one who's been lying, manipulating. Mrs. Mitchell, Judge Harrison cut her off sharply. I advise you to remain silent at this time. Anything you say may be used in subsequent proceedings. Vanessa subsided, but her eyes burned with hatred as she glared at me across the courtroom. Judge Harrison continued, this petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am issuing a protective order prohibiting William and Vanessa Mitchell from contacting Eleanor Mitchell without her explicit consent, transmitted through counsel. He banged his gavel decisively. Court is adjourned. As the courtroom began to clear, I sat for a moment, stunned by the swift resolution. We had won, completely, unequivocally won. The petition was dismissed. William and Vanessa were potentially facing criminal charges, and I was protected by a court order. Yet victory felt hollow. Across the rapidly emptying courtroom, William stood frozen, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Was it regret? Anger? Fear? Before I could decide, Vanessa grabbed his arm and practically dragged him toward the exit. It's over, Martin said, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. You've won, Eleanor. Have I? I murmured, watching my son disappear through the courtroom doors. It doesn't feel like winning. The legal battle is won, Brian amended. The emotional one, well, that's a different matter. As we gathered our things to leave, a court officer approached our table. Mrs. Mitchell? Judge Harrison would like to see you in his chambers, if you have a moment. Surprised, I glanced at Martin, who nodded encouragingly. I'll come with you. Judge Harrison's chambers were warmly furnished, with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk dominating the space. He rose as we entered, gesturing for us to take seats opposite him. Mrs. Mitchell, he began once we were settled, I wanted to speak with you privately. What happened in my courtroom today was troubling, to say the least. Yes, Your Honor. I agreed quietly. I've been a judge for 27 years, he continued, and I've seen my share of family disputes over estates. But the calculated nature of what your son and daughter-in-law attempted. He shook his head. It was particularly egregious. Thank you for seeing through their deception, I said. It wasn't difficult, given the evidence. He leaned forward slightly. But that's not why I asked to see you. I wanted to make sure you understand what comes next. The district attorney's investigation? He nodded. They may file criminal charges based on my referral. If that happens, you'll likely be asked to testify against your son. The thought sent a chill through me. As angry and hurt as I was, the idea of testifying against William in a criminal court, potentially sending him to prison. Could I do that? Should I? Judge Harrison seemed to read my thoughts. It's a difficult position for any parent, he said gently. And ultimately, it will be your decision whether to cooperate with the prosecution. I understand, I said, though in truth, I wasn't sure what I would do when that moment came. There's one other matter, the judge continued. The recordings you presented today suggest that Mr. Townsend may have been impersonating an attorney. That's a serious offense. The State Bar Association will want to speak with you about that as well. I nodded, feeling suddenly overwhelmed by the legal machinery that had been set in motion. What had begun as a simple desire to remain in my home had cascaded into potential criminal cases, bar investigations, and God knew what else. It's a lot to process, Judge Harrison acknowledged. But you have good counsel in Mr. Goldsmith, and you've shown remarkable resilience throughout this ordeal. I have no doubt you'll weather what comes next. As we left the courthouse, I was grateful for Martin and Brian's protective presence, shielding me from the reporters who had gathered outside. News of the dramatic hearing had clearly spread. No comment at this time, Brian repeated as we made our way to Margaret's waiting car. Once safely inside, Margaret turned to me expectantly.
Well,
What happened? We won, I said simply. The petition was dismissed. William and Vanessa are potentially facing criminal charges, and I have a protective order keeping them away from me. Oh, Ellie, Margaret breathed, reaching across to squeeze my hand. That's wonderful news. It is, I agreed, though my voice lacked conviction. But it's not over. Not really. What do you mean? She asked, starting the car. I gazed out the window at the courthouse receding behind us, thinking of William's face as he'd left the courtroom, of the choices that still lay ahead. Winning the case was just the beginning, I said softly. Now I have to decide what kind of justice I want, what kind of person I want to be in the aftermath of all this. As we drove back to Margaret's house, I found myself thinking not of the future but of the past, of William as a little boy, learning to ride a bike with Richard running alongside, of family dinners around our big kitchen table, of the life we had shared before greed and resentment poisoned everything. Could any of that be salvaged? Did I even want to try? The answer, I realized, was still hidden somewhere in the fog of grief and betrayal that surrounded me. But for the first time in weeks, I had the space and the legal protection to find my own way forward on my own terms. Whatever came next, that much at least was certain. I would face it on my feet, not on my knees. The days following the court hearing passed in a strange haze, relief mingled with exhaustion, victory shadowed by loss. I remained at Margaret's house, unable to face returning to my empty mansion just yet. Though the protective order kept William and Vanessa legally at bay, the thought of walking those halls alone, surrounded by the ghosts of betrayal, was more than I could bear. You can stay as long as you need, Margaret assured me over breakfast 3 days after the hearing. This place has been too quiet since Frank passed. I smiled gratefully at my oldest friend. I don't know what I would have done without you, Margaret. You would have managed, she said firmly, echoing what she'd told me before. You're stronger than you realize. Perhaps she was right. I had faced my son in court and won. I had protected what was mine. But the cost of that victory weighed heavily on my heart. Have you heard anything more from the district attorney's office? Margaret asked, refilling my coffee cup. I shook my head. Not yet. Martin says these things take time. They're reviewing the evidence, deciding whether to press charges. And how do you feel about that possibility? William facing criminal charges. The question had haunted me since Judge Harrison first mentioned it. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants justice, wants him to face consequences for what he tried to do to me. But another part still sees him as your little boy, Margaret finished gently. Yes. I stared into my coffee cup, watching the cream swirl in hypnotic patterns. Is that weakness, do you think? After everything he's done? Margaret considered the question carefully. I think it's being a mother. The love doesn't just vanish, even when they hurt us beyond measure. Before I could respond, my phone rang, Martin Goldsmith's number flashing on the screen. Eleanor, he greeted me, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. How are you holding up? As well as can be expected, I replied. Is there news? Yes, though I'm not sure how you'll receive it. The district attorney has decided to proceed with charges against Vanessa and Gregory Townsend, but not William. I sat up straighter. Not William? But why? Apparently, he's cooperating with the investigation. According to the DA, he's provided evidence that Vanessa was the mastermind behind the scheme, with Townsend's assistance. William is claiming he was manipulated, pressured into going along with their plan. A complex mix of emotions flooded through me: relief that my son might be spared criminal charges, anger that he was once again avoiding responsibility for his actions, and bitter amusement at how quickly he'd turned on Vanessa when faced with legal consequences. "Do you believe him?" I asked Martin. "That's not for me to say," he replied diplomatically. "But the DA finds his account credible, especially in light of the recordings where Vanessa is clearly the more aggressive party." I thought of Caroline's recordings, of William's hesitation when Vanessa pushed for more extreme measures. There had been moments of doubt in his voice, flickers of the son I had raised. But he had still gone along with it. He had still stood silent while Vanessa ordered me out of my home. "There's more," Martin continued. "William has filed for divorce." This news genuinely surprised me. Divorce? After all this? It was filed yesterday. Irreconcilable differences, of course, but the timing suggests it's connected to the criminal investigation, distancing himself from Vanessa before her trial. Or perhaps it was genuine remorse, a realization of how toxic their relationship had become. I wanted to believe that, but experience had taught me to be wary of convenient changes of heart. "The DA would like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss the case against Vanessa and Townsend," Martin added. "They'll need your testimony." "I'll be there," I assured him. "What about the house? Can I return home now?" "Legally, yes. The protective order prevents William and Vanessa from coming near you or the property." "But..." He hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready for that?"
Was I?
The mansion had been my sanctuary for decades, but now it felt tainted by betrayal. Yet it was still mine, still the home Richard and I had built together. I couldn't let Vanessa's poison drive me away permanently. "Yes," I decided. "It's time I went home." After ending the call, I shared the news with Margaret, who received it with characteristic pragmatism. "So William's throwing Vanessa under the bus," she observed. "Can't say I'm surprised. He always did look for the easiest path." "Do you think he was truly manipulated by her?" I asked, desperately wanting someone else's perspective. Margaret considered this. "Influenced, certainly. Manipulated to a point. But he's a grown man, Ellie. He made his choices." She was right, of course. Whatever Vanessa's influence, William had been a willing participant in the scheme to disinherit me. The recordings proved that much. "I'm going home today," I told her, changing the subject. "It's time." Margaret studied my face, then nodded. "I'll help you pack. And I'm coming with you, just to get you settled. I don't like the thought of you alone in that big house right away." 2 hours later, we pulled into the circular driveway of my mansion. The sight of it, grand, imposing, and undeniably mine, sent a surge of complex emotions through me. This was where Richard and I had built our life. Where we had raised William, celebrated holidays, created a family. Where Richard had died, and where, less than 3 months later, our son had tried to cast me out. "Ready?" Margaret asked gently from the driver's seat. I took a deep breath. "Ready." The house was eerily quiet as we entered, our footsteps echoing on the marble floors of the foyer. Everywhere I looked, I could see signs of Vanessa's renovations. Walls painted in cold, modern colors, unfamiliar furniture arranged in sterile configurations, family photos replaced by abstract art. "They certainly wasted no time making changes," Margaret observed, looking around with undisguised distaste. "It's just things," I said, though the erasure of our family history stung deeply. "They can be changed back." We moved through the house room by room, cataloging the alterations. The kitchen had been completely redone, my warm, inviting space transformed into a showpiece of gleaming stainless steel and cold marble. The living room's comfortable, lived-in furniture had been replaced with angular modern pieces that looked beautiful but uninviting. But it was the master bedroom that truly stopped me in my tracks. The room where Richard and I had slept for decades, where he had taken his last breath in my arms, had been gutted. The walls were now a stark white, the hardwood floors covered with plush gray carpet. Our bed was gone, replaced by an enormous platform bed with a tufted headboard. Richard's reading chair, the nightstands we'd chosen together, The lamps that had cast a warm glow over our evening rituals, all gone. "Oh, Ellie," Margaret murmured, seeing my expression. I moved to the window, touching the unfamiliar curtains. "It's like they wanted to erase every trace of us," I said softly. "Every memory." "We'll change it back," Margaret said firmly. "Every bit of it. Make it yours again." But would it ever truly feel like mine again? Could I sleep in this room, so thoroughly transformed, without feeling like an intruder in my own space? "Let's check Richard's study," I suggested, turning away from the bedroom. It was the one room they hadn't touched before I left. The study, at least, remained largely as Richard had left it. His leather chair still sat behind the mahogany desk, his books still lined the shelves, his collection of vintage fountain pens still displayed in their glass case. Even the calendar on his desk remained turned to the day he died. I sank into his chair, running my hands over the worn leather armrests, breathing in the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. Here, at last, was a space untouched by Vanessa's destructive influence. Why do you think they left this room alone? Margaret wondered, examining the bookshelves. Perhaps William couldn't bring himself to erase his father completely, I suggested. Or perhaps they simply hadn't gotten around to it yet, too busy plotting my removal to focus on this one room. As I sat at Richard's desk, something caught my eye, a small red light blinking behind one of the books on the shelf across from me. I stood and moved closer, pushing the book aside to reveal a tiny camera, its lens pointed directly at the desk. "Margaret," I called, my voice tight. "Look at this." She joined me, squinting at the device. A camera? Richard installed cameras in his study. Not Richard, I realized with a chill. The recordings he made were audio only. This is something else. We began searching the room methodically, finding 2 more hidden cameras before we were done, one in the ceiling light fixture, another behind a painting on the wall, all positioned to capture different angles of the desk and seating area. Why would they put cameras in here? Margaret wondered. The answer came to me with sudden clarity. They were watching me. After Richard died, they moved in and installed these to monitor my movements, my conversations. That's how they always seemed to know where I was, what I was doing. The violation of privacy was profound, a fresh betrayal layered on top of the others. Had they been watching me grieve? Spying on my private moments of vulnerability? "We need to check the rest of the house," I said grimly. Our search revealed cameras in nearly every room, the kitchen, living room, my bedroom, even the garden patio. Like a sick reality show, my life had been under constant surveillance. "This is beyond disturbing," Margaret declared as we gathered the devices in a box. "It's criminal. We should call the police." Add it to the list of charges, I agreed bitterly. But first, I want to know where these feeds were going. Who was watching? The answer lay in what had been William's childhood bedroom, now converted to a home office. There, on a desk in the corner, sat a computer with multiple monitors. When I turned it on, the screens lit up with live feeds from cameras throughout the house, cameras we hadn't yet found. There are more, I realized, studying the displays. Dozens more. Margaret was already on the phone with Brian Reynolds. "We need a professional to sweep the house," she told me as she waited for him to answer. "Someone who can find all these devices." While she arranged for a security team to come the following day, I searched the computer for recordings, for evidence of how long this surveillance had been going on. The files were organized by date, going back to the day after Richard's funeral, the day William and Vanessa had moved in. "They've been watching me from the beginning," I told Margaret as she ended her call. "Everything I did, everywhere I went in my own home." "The DA will want to see this," she said. "It strengthens the case against them. Proves premeditation planning." I nodded absently, still scrolling through the files. One folder caught my eye, labeled simply RM Final. With a sense of foreboding, I clicked it open. The first file was dated the day Richard died. With trembling fingers, I double-clicked it. The video showed Richard's study, this very room, from the angle of the camera behind the painting. Richard sat at his desk, looking tired but determined, speaking on the phone. "Yes, Martin, tomorrow at 10. We'll finalize the changes to the will then." I've had enough of their games. He hung up and rubbed his eyes wearily. Then he opened a drawer and removed a small pill bottle, shaking 2 tablets into his palm. Heart medication. I recognized the distinctive shape and color. He swallowed them with a sip of water, then returned to the papers on his desk. The door opened, and Vanessa entered, carrying a cup of tea. "I thought you might need this, Richard," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "You've been working for hours." Richard looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Thank you, Vanessa. That's thoughtful of you." She placed the cup on his desk, hovering as he took a sip. "How are you feeling? William mentioned you seemed tired at dinner." "Just the usual," Richard replied, setting the cup down. "Nothing to worry about. Still, you should rest. Those papers can wait until tomorrow." Richard shook his head. "Some things can't wait, I'm afraid." Vanessa's expression shifted subtly, a flicker of something cold passing across her features. "Important work?" "Necessary work," Richard amended, taking another sip of tea. She lingered, watching him drink. "William and I were talking about taking a trip next month. Would you and Eleanor like to join us? A family vacation might do everyone good." Richard set the cup down again, a faint frown creasing his brow. "That's an unexpected invitation. You've never shown much interest in family vacations before." "People change," Vanessa said with a shrug. "Family becomes more important as time passes." Indeed, Richard agreed, though his expression remained skeptical. He returned to his papers, clearly expecting her to leave. But Vanessa remained, watching him intently. After a moment, Richard looked up again, blinking rapidly. "Is something wrong?" Vanessa asked, her voice concerned, but her eyes alert, watchful. "I feel strange," Richard murmured, touching his forehead. "Suddenly very tired." "The heart medication sometimes does that," Vanessa suggested. "Why don't you rest for a bit? I can help you to bed." Richard shook his head, trying to focus on the papers before him. "No, I need to finish this. Martin is coming tomorrow." His words began to slur slightly, his movements becoming uncoordinated. He reached for the phone, knocking it to the floor. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice now clearly distressed. "I can't, something's wrong." Vanessa made no move to help him, to call for assistance. She simply stood watching as Richard struggled to rise, fell back into his chair, his breathing becoming labored. "Vanessa," he gasped. "Get Eleanor." "Eleanor is resting," Vanessa replied calmly. "I wouldn't want to disturb her." Horror froze me as I watched the scene unfold. I had been home that evening, just upstairs in our bedroom, reading. I had no idea Richard was in distress. No idea Vanessa was with him. On the screen, Richard's distress escalated. He clutched his chest, his face contorted in pain. "Heart attack," he managed. "Call 911. Vanessa finally moved, but not toward the phone. Instead, she calmly collected the teacup from the desk. "Do you know what William told me the first time we discussed your death?" she asked conversationally, as if Richard wasn't gasping for breath before her. "He said, Dad's too stubborn to die. He'll outlive us all just to spite us." Isn't that funny?
He was wrong, though.
"You're not outliving anyone." Richard stared at her in horrified comprehension, struggling to speak. "Don't worry about Eleanor," Vanessa continued, moving toward the door. "We'll take good care of her.
For a little while, at least."
She left, taking the teacup with her, closing the door quietly behind her. The video continued, showing Richard's desperate attempts to reach the phone, to call for help. He managed to pull himself from the chair but collapsed to the floor, still clutching his chest. For long, agonizing minutes, he struggled alone, his movements growing weaker until finally, he lay still. I realized I was screaming only when Margaret's arms encircled me, pulling me away from the computer, turning me from the terrible images on the screen. "She killed him," I sobbed, collapsing against my friend. "She killed Richard, and I was right upstairs. I could have saved him if I'd known." "Sure," Margaret soothed, though her own voice shook with shock. "You couldn't have known. This isn't your fault." But guilt crashed over me in waves. I had been reading in bed, peaceful and oblivious, while my husband died alone on his study floor, poisoned by our daughter-in-law. "We need to call the police," Margaret said firmly, reaching for her phone. "Right now." The next hours passed in a blur of police officers, evidence technicians, and detectives. I sat numb in the living room as they took the computer, interviewed me, photographed the cameras we had found. The video of Richard's death was now evidence in what the lead detective grimly called a clear case of homicide. "We'll need a toxicology analysis of your husband's remains," he explained gently, "to determine what substance was used." The thought of Richard's body being examined, was almost too much to bear. But I nodded my consent. Nothing mattered now except justice for Richard. "What about my son?" I asked the detective. "William. Was he involved?" "We'll be investigating everyone connected to the case," he assured me. "If your son had knowledge of or participated in your husband's death, we'll find out." But had he? The William I'd raised couldn't have been complicit in murder, could he? The William who'd stood silent while Vanessa ordered me from my home, who'd conspired to have me declared incompetent, was he capable of this deeper, darker betrayal? I didn't know anymore. The son I thought I knew had vanished, replaced by a stranger whose depths I couldn't fathom. Late that night, after the police had finally left with promises to post an officer outside the house, Margaret insisted I try to rest. "You can't stay here tonight," she declared. "Not after what we've discovered. Come back to my house." But I shook my head. "I need to be here, Margaret. In our home. Where Richard died." She clearly didn't agree, but respected my decision. "Then I'm staying too. No arguments." Too exhausted to protest, I let her prepare the guest room for herself while I returned to the master bedroom. Despite Vanessa's renovations, despite knowing I wouldn't sleep, I needed to be in the space Richard and I had shared. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, staring at walls now devoid of our photographs, at floors no longer bearing the imprint of our footsteps. Like Richard himself, every trace of our life together had been systematically erased. "I'm so sorry," I whispered to the empty room. "I should have been there. I should have known." Grief, fresh and raw as the day he died, washed over me. But now it was compounded by rage, at Vanessa for taking him from me, at William for whatever role he had played, at myself for not somehow sensing that Richard was in danger. I must have fallen into a fitful sleep eventually, because I woke with a start to the sound of my phone ringing. The bedside clock read 3:17 a.m. "Hello," I answered groggily. "Mom," William's voice, tense and afraid. "Mom, you have to help me. The police are here. They're saying I helped Vanessa murder Dad. That I knew what she was planning." I sat up straight, suddenly wide awake. "Where are you, William?" "At the precinct downtown. They arrested me an hour ago." "Mom, please, you have to tell them I didn't know. I would never have let her hurt Dad. You know that, right? Did I?" The son who'd tried to steal my home, who'd conspired to have me declared incompetent, would he have stopped at murder? "William," I said carefully, "did you know what Vanessa was planning to do to your father?" A pause, too long to be innocent.
"No."
"Of course not. I loved Dad." "But you knew afterward," I pressed. "You knew she'd done something to him." Another pause. I suspected, but I couldn't prove anything. And then she threatened me, said she'd claim I was involved if I went to the police. "So you said nothing?" I concluded, my voice hardening. "You let your father's killer go unpunished. You let me believe he died naturally." "Mom, please," he begged. I was scared. "Vanessa, she's not who you think she is. The things she's capable of." "I know exactly what she's capable of," I interrupted. "I watched her let your father die. I saw the recording, William. The camera that you two installed in his study. It captured everything." Silence on the line. Then, quietly, "There was a recording?"
"Yes."
"And now the police have it." "Oh God," he whispered. "Mom, you have to believe me. I didn't know she was going to kill him. I thought she was just trying to find out about the will, about his plans. I never imagined she'd actually—" "What, William? Poison him? Watch him die?" Leave him alone on the floor of his study while I sat upstairs, unaware my husband was dying. Mom, did you watch the recording? I demanded, a new, horrible thought occurring to me. After it happened, did you see what she did to your father? His silence was damning. You did. I breathed, nausea rising in my throat. You watched your father die and you did nothing. You protected his killer. I was trapped, William protested weakly. She said she'd implicate me if I went to the police. That no one would believe I wasn't involved. And so you became involved, I said, my voice hard with contempt. By your silence, by your compliance. You became her accomplice. Mom, please, he begged again. I need your help. Tell the police I wouldn't have hurt Dad. Tell them I couldn't have known what she was planning. I closed my eyes, picturing Richard struggling alone on his study floor while our son protected his killer. I can't do that, William. I don't know what you knew or when you knew it. All I know is that you chose Vanessa over your father. Over me. Over justice. They'll charge me as an accessory, he said, his voice breaking. I could go to prison. Yes, I agreed quietly. You could. Another long silence. Then, his voice harder now. So that's it? You're abandoning me when I need you most? Some mother you are. The sudden shift in his tone, the manipulation embedded in his words, confirmed what I had feared, that William's remorse was as calculated as his betrayal had been. Goodbye, William, I said softly, and ended the call. I sat in the darkness, phone clutched in my hand, as waves of grief crashed over me. Not just for Richard now, but for William too, the son I had raised, the man he might have been, the relationship we would never have again. Margaret found me there when dawn broke, still sitting motionless on the edge of the bed. Ellie, she called softly from the doorway. Have you been up all night? I told her about William's call, about his admission that he had known of Vanessa's crime, at least after the fact. The police will want to know about this conversation, Margaret said when I finished. I know, I sighed. I'll call the detective later. She studied my face with concern. You look exhausted. Why don't you try to rest a bit more? Everything else can wait. But I shook my head. There's something I need to do first. An hour later, showered and dressed, I sat at Richard's desk in his study. The room felt different now, knowing what had happened here, knowing I had been just upstairs, unaware of my husband's final moments. I'm so sorry, Richard, I whispered to the empty room. I should have been here. But regret couldn't change the past. All I could do now was honor Richard's memory by seeking justice for his murder, even if that justice implicated our only son. I picked up the phone and called the detective assigned to the case, relating my early morning conversation with William. This corroborates what we suspected, the detective told me. The timestamps on the video files show they were accessed multiple times in the days after your husband's death. We believe both William and Vanessa viewed the recording. And did nothing, I said bitterly. Mrs. Mitchell, the detective said carefully, I understand this is incredibly difficult for you. But your testimony about your son's admission will be crucial to our case. Are you prepared to testify against him if necessary? The question hung in the air, weighted with implications. To testify against my own son, to potentially send him to prison. It was a mother's nightmare. But I thought of Richard, alone and afraid in his final moments. I thought of the justice he deserved. Yes, I said firmly. I'll testify. After ending the call, I sat in Richard's chair for a long time, surrounded by his books, his collections, the remnants of his presence that even Vanessa hadn't managed to erase. Here, in this room where he had died, I made a silent promise to my husband. I would see this through, no matter how painful. I would ensure that those responsible for his death faced consequences, even if one of those people was our son. The following days brought a whirlwind of legal proceedings. Vanessa was charged with first-degree murder, William with being an accessory after the fact. Bail was denied for both, the judge deeming them flight risks given the severity of the charges and their financial resources. The story exploded in the local media, then nationally. Widow's nightmare. Husband murdered, son implicated, screamed one headline. Real estate tycoon killed by daughter-in-law while wife SAT upstairs, proclaimed another. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, shouting questions whenever I came or went. Old friends called, expressing shock and sympathy. Even casual acquaintances reached out, eager for inside details of the scandal that had captivated the public. I retreated into seclusion, grateful for Margaret's steadfast presence as my buffer against the world's morbid curiosity. Martin Goldsmith handled legal matters, Brian Reynolds managed the press, and I focused on the one thing that mattered most, preparing to testify about Richard's murder. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks after the arrests. Both William and Vanessa had secured high-powered defense attorneys, paid for with money that had once been Richard's. The irony was not lost on me. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold, a crisp autumn day that seemed at odds with the darkness we would confront in the courtroom. Margaret drove me downtown, navigating through the throng of reporters at the courthouse steps. Inside, the courtroom was packed, journalists, legal observers, and the morbidly curious all crammed into the gallery. William and Vanessa sat at separate tables with their respective defense teams, neither acknowledging the other's presence. When I entered, William's head snapped up, his eyes finding mine with a silent plea. Vanessa didn't turn, her back rigid with defiance. I took my seat in the front row behind the prosecution table, Margaret beside me. The district attorney, a formidable woman named Helen Patel, greeted me with a reassuring nod. Remember, she had coached me the day before. Just tell the truth. Don't embellish, don't minimize. Just what you know to be true. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. First came the formal reading of charges, then opening statements from both prosecution and defense. Vanessa's attorney painted her as a victim of circumstance, a woman falsely accused based on misinterpreted evidence. William's lawyer portrayed him as another victim, manipulated by his wife, unaware of her deadly intentions, paralyzed by fear after discovering her crime. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand on legs that felt unsteady beneath me. After being sworn in, I faced the courtroom, conscious of all eyes upon me, especially William's, desperate and pleading, and Vanessa's, cold with hatred. Ms. Patel began gently, establishing my relationship to the accused, the timeline of events following Richard's death. Then she moved to the heart of the matter. Mrs. Mitchell, can you tell the court about the discovery you made on August 15th regarding your husband's death? I took a deep breath and described finding the hidden cameras, the computer with its damning footage. My voice faltered as I recounted watching Richard's final moments, seeing Vanessa's callous disregard as he struggled and died. And what was your understanding of your husband's health prior to his death? Ms. Patel asked. Richard had a heart condition, I explained, but it was well managed with medication. His doctor had just given him a positive report at his checkup the week before he died. So his death was unexpected? Completely, I confirmed. I was told it was a massive heart attack, sudden and unsurvivable. I never questioned it because why would I? Who imagines their husband has been murdered? Ms. Patel nodded sympathetically. Mrs. Mitchell, did you have any contact with your son after these discoveries were made? I described William's early morning phone call, his admissions, his pleas for help. As I spoke, I kept my eyes fixed on Ms. Patel, unable to look at my son. And what was your impression of his knowledge regarding your husband's death? He admitted he suspected Vanessa had done something to Richard, I said steadily. He admitted seeing the recording afterward. He knew she had murdered his father, and he protected her. William's attorney was on his feet immediately. Objection. The witness is speculating about my client's knowledge and motivations. Sustained, the judge ruled. The jury will disregard the witness's characterization of the defendant's actions. Ms. Patel rephrased. Based on your conversation with your son, what did he tell you about his actions after learning of the recording? He told me he remained silent because Vanessa threatened to implicate him if he went to the police. No further questions, Ms. Patel concluded, returning to her seat. William's attorney approached for cross-examination, his manner solicitous, almost paternal. Mrs. Mitchell, this must be incredibly difficult for you, he began. Losing your husband, then discovering the circumstances of his death, and now facing these proceedings involving your only child. You have my deepest sympathies. I nodded stiffly, wary of his performative compassion. Would you say you're under significant emotional strain at this time? I'm grieving my husband, yes. And perhaps experiencing some confusion, some difficulty processing complex situations? I saw where he was heading, trying to undermine my credibility, to suggest I was emotionally unstable or confused. The same tactic William and Vanessa had tried to use to take my home. I am perfectly clear-headed about what happened to my husband, I said firmly, and about my son's role in concealing it. The attorney's expression hardened slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, isn't it true that you and your son have been engaged in a legal dispute over your late husband's estate? Yes. A dispute that became quite acrimonious, with your son attempting to have you declared incompetent? Yes, I acknowledged, though the court dismissed that petition. Indeed. But might these proceedings not represent an opportunity for you to retaliate against your son for that attempted action? Anger flared within me. Are you suggesting I would falsely implicate my own son in his father's murder as revenge for a property dispute? I'm simply asking if your testimony might be colored by personal animus toward your son. My testimony is based on facts, I stated coldly. On the recording that shows Vanessa Mitchell poisoning my husband and leaving him to die. On my son's own admission that he knew about it afterward and did nothing. My feelings about William's betrayal are irrelevant to those facts. The attorney tried several more angles, attempting to paint me as vindictive, confused, or manipulated by the prosecution. But I held firm to the truth, refusing to be baited into emotional outbursts or contradictions. When Vanessa's attorney cross-examined me, his approach was even more aggressive, suggesting the recording had been altered or misinterpreted, that Richard's death was indeed natural, that I was manufacturing a murder case out of grief and resentment. Mrs. Mitchell, he said with exaggerated patience, isn't it possible that what you saw on that recording was simply my client bringing your husband tea, checking on his welfare, and then leaving to respect his privacy when he began to feel unwell? What I saw, I replied evenly, was your client watching my husband collapse, ignoring his pleas for help, and taking the teacup with her when she left, the teacup that contained whatever she used to poison him. That's speculation, the attorney countered. The medical examiner hasn't even completed the toxicology report on your husband's remains. The medical examiner hasn't seen the recording, I pointed out.
I have.
Richard wasn't simply feeling unwell. He was in distress, begging for help that your client deliberately withheld. By the time my testimony concluded, I was emotionally drained but satisfied that I had spoken the truth, had honored Richard's memory with my steadfastness. As I returned to my seat beside Margaret, I finally allowed myself to look directly at William. My son sat with his head bowed, shoulders slumped in defeat. Whether from genuine remorse or merely the recognition that his elaborate schemes had finally unraveled completely, I couldn't tell. I no longer trusted my ability to read him, to know his heart. The preliminary hearing continued for 2 more days, with testimony from the detective who had investigated the case, the forensic expert who had analyzed the recording, and Caroline Davis, who testified about conversations she had overheard between William and Vanessa in the weeks following Richard's death. On the final day, the medical examiner took the stand to present preliminary findings from Richard's autopsy. His testimony was clinical, detached, as he described the evidence of poisoning found in the exhumed remains. The toxicology report shows elevated levels of digoxin in the deceased's tissues, he explained. Digoxin is a medication used to treat heart conditions, but in excessive doses, it can cause cardiac arrest. And would the deceased have had this medication prescribed to him? Ms. Patel asked. Yes, according to his medical records. But the concentration found in his tissues is significantly higher than his prescribed dosage would produce. So someone gave Richard Mitchell an overdose of his own heart medication, Ms. Patel clarified. That is the most likely explanation for these findings, yes. The evidence was damning. By the end of the hearing, the judge ruled there was sufficient cause to proceed to trial for both Vanessa and William. Trial dates were set for 3 months hence, with both defendants remaining in custody until then. As we left the courthouse, Margaret squeezed my hand. You did what you had to do, Ellie. Richard would be proud. Would he? Or would he be heartbroken to see his son facing prison, his wife testifying against their only child? I couldn't know. All I could do was follow the path that seemed right, that honored the truth of what had happened. Back at the mansion, I found myself drawn once more to Richard's study. The police had removed the hidden cameras, but I could still see their locations in my mind's eye. Could still picture Richard at his desk, Vanessa offering the poison tea, my husband collapsing as she watched with cold detachment. I sank into his chair, running my hands over the worn leather armrests as I had so many times since his death. But now the comfort of his lingering presence was tainted by the knowledge of his suffering in this very room. I'm sorry, I whispered again, though I knew it changed nothing. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. A soft knock at the door interrupted my vigil. Margaret stood in the doorway, holding an envelope. This just arrived by courier, she said, handing it to me. From William's attorney. The envelope was heavy, expensive stationery with the law firm's embossed logo in the corner. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter from William. Mom, by the time you read this, the preliminary hearing will be over. I know what you must think of me now, and I can't blame you. The truth is, I didn't know Vanessa was planning to kill Dad.
I swear that on my life.
But you're right that I suspected afterward, that I saw the recording and said nothing. I told myself I was protecting you from the truth, that knowing Dad was murdered would destroy you. But that was a lie I told myself to ease my conscience. The truth is, I was protecting myself. From scandal, from legal consequences, from having to face what Vanessa had done, what she was capable of doing. I was a coward, Mom. And in my cowardice, I betrayed both you and Dad. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I'm pleading guilty. I won't drag this out, won't make you endure a trial where my attorney attacks your credibility or tries to paint you as confused or vindictive.
You deserve better than that. You always have.
There's one more thing you should know. The night before Dad died, Vanessa and I had a fight. She wanted to confront him directly about the will, to pressure him into changing it. I refused, said we needed to be patient, to handle things delicately. She was furious with me, said I was weak, that I'd never be half the man Dad was. I think that's when she decided to take matters into her own hands. I didn't see it then, but looking back, I should have known what she was capable of. Should have warned Dad, protected him somehow. That failure will haunt me for the rest of my life, as it should.
I'm sorry, Mom.
For everything. William. I read the letter twice, then set it down on Richard's desk, emotions churning within me. Was this genuine remorse, or another manipulation? Was William truly accepting responsibility, or positioning himself for a lighter sentence? And did it matter? Whether his contrition was real or feigned, the damage was done. Richard was gone. Our family was shattered. Some betrayals couldn't be undone, no matter how sincere the apology. Yet a small part of me, the mother who had held William as a newborn, who had bandaged his skinned knees and celebrated his triumphs, wanted to believe him, wanted to find some way forward that didn't end with my only child spending years in prison. What does it say? Margaret asked gently. I handed her the letter, watching her face as she read. Her expression remained neutral, giving nothing away. Do you believe him? I asked when she finished. Margaret considered the question carefully. I think he's telling the truth about not knowing Vanessa planned to kill Richard. But the rest? She shook her head. He's been lying for so long, Ellie. To you, to himself. It's hard to know what's real anymore. She was right. Trust, once broken, wasn't easily restored. Especially not trust fractured as completely as mine had been. What will you do? Margaret asked. About his plea? Nothing. I replied after a moment's thought. It's his decision. If he wants to plead guilty, spare us all a trial. That's his choice to make. And after? When he's served his time? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. Would there be reconciliation? Forgiveness? A relationship rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal? I don't know, I admitted. I can't see that far ahead right now. One step at a time. That was all I could manage. Get through the legal proceedings. Process my grief for Richard. Grief now complicated by the knowledge of how he died. Begin to rebuild my life in a home that no longer felt like mine. And somewhere in that process, I would have to decide what, if anything, remained of my relationship with William. Whether a mother's love could survive such profound betrayal. Whether forgiveness was possible, or even right. As the sun set outside Richard's study window, casting long shadows across the floor, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine what he would advise if he were here. What wisdom he would offer for this impossible situation. But Richard was gone, his voice silenced forever by Vanessa's cruelty and William's complicity. I was alone now, facing choices I'd never imagined having to make. Come, Margaret said softly, touching my shoulder. You need to rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. I rose from Richard's chair, casting one last glance around the study where he had spent his final moments. Whatever came next, William's guilty plea, Vanessa's trial, the long process of rebuilding my shattered life, I would face it with the strength Richard had always believed I possessed. One step at a time. One day at a time. That was all anyone could do. As I followed Margaret from the study, switching off the light behind me, I felt something shift within me. Not healing, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward it. Toward whatever future awaited on the other side of this nightmare. A future without Richard. A future with a son in prison. A future I had never imagined and still couldn't fully comprehend. But a future nonetheless. And somehow I would find the strength to face it. Back in the master bedroom, still foreign in its renovation but slowly becoming mine again as I replaced Vanessa's cold modernism with touches of warmth and memory, I prepared for bed. As I turned down the covers, my phone chimed with a text message. Unknown number. This isn't over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot. William may have given up, but I haven't. You'll regret the day you cross me. Vanessa. Somehow, from jail, she had found a way to reach me, to threaten me. I should have been frightened. Should have called the police immediately, reported the violation of the no-contact order. Instead, a strange calm settled over me. After everything I had endured, Richard's death, William's betrayal, the public spectacle of the hearing, what more could Vanessa possibly do to me? I saved the message as evidence, then blocked the number. Whatever game Vanessa was playing, I refused to participate. Her threats were empty now, her power over my life finally broken. Or so I believed, as I drifted off to sleep in the quiet of the mansion, unaware that, even from behind bars, Vanessa Mitchell had set in motion a plan that would shake the foundations of everything I thought I knew about Richard, about our marriage, and about the empire we had built together. A plan that would make all the betrayals I had suffered so far pale in comparison to what was coming. The weeks following the preliminary hearing brought a strange, uneasy calm. William's guilty plea had been accepted. 5 years for accessory after the fact to Richard's murder, eligible for parole in 3 with good behavior. The public spectacle I had dreaded, a full trial with my son in the defendant's chair, had been averted. Vanessa, however, remained defiant. She had rejected all plea offers, insisting on her innocence despite the damning evidence against her. Her trial was scheduled for February, 5 months away. In the meantime, I began the slow process of reclaiming my home and my life. I hired contractors to undo Vanessa's renovations, to restore the warmth and character she had systematically erased. Room by room, the mansion began to feel like mine again, not exactly as it had been when Richard was alive, but not the cold showplace Vanessa had created either. Margaret visited daily, her steadfast presence a comfort as I navigated this strange new chapter. Martin Goldsmith handled the legal complexities of Richard's estate, now that the truth of his death had been established. The scholarship fund Richard had established in his will, the one that had so infuriated Vanessa when she learned nearly half of his fortune would go to strangers, was finally being implemented. He would be pleased, Martin told me as we finalized the details. 50 deserving students will receive full scholarships each year. That's quite a legacy. A legacy that might never have come to fruition if Vanessa had succeeded in her plans. The thought strengthened my resolve to see the fund established properly, to honor Richard's wishes in every detail. But beneath this veneer of progress, Vanessa's threat lingered in my mind. This isn't over, Eleanor. Not by a long shot. What did she mean? What could she possibly do from behind bars to hurt me further? I got my answer on a crisp October morning, 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing. I was having breakfast when Margaret arrived, a newspaper clutched in her hand, her expression grim. "Have you seen this?" she asked, placing the paper in front of me. The headline hit me like a physical blow. Murder victim's secret life exposed. Mitchell had second family, claims jailed wife. I stared at the words, uncomprehending at first. Then I began to read the article beneath. In a shocking development in the Richard Mitchell murder case, accused killer Vanessa Mitchell has provided evidence that her late father-in-law maintained a second family for over 30 years. According to documents provided by Mrs. Mitchell's attorney, the real estate tycoon had a long-term relationship with former employee Catherine Harlow, with whom he fathered 2 children, a relationship he allegedly concealed from his wife, Eleanor Mitchell. This information provides crucial context for understanding the family dynamics at play, said Gregory Townsend, spokesman for Vanessa Mitchell's defense team. It demonstrates that Richard Mitchell was not the devoted husband portrayed by the prosecution, but a man living a double life who had deceived his wife for decades. When contacted for comment, Eleanor Mitchell's representatives declined to respond, stating only that these allegations have no bearing on the murder charges against Vanessa Mitchell. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. A second family? Richard, my Richard, leading a double life for our entire marriage? It couldn't be true. It simply couldn't. "Ellie," Margaret said gently, taking the paper from my trembling hands. "This is clearly a desperate ploy by Vanessa's team to discredit Richard, to create reasonable doubt for the jury. But what if it's true?" I whispered, voicing the fear that had seized my heart. What if he really did have another woman, other children? "It's not true," Margaret insisted. "Think about it, Ellie. Richard adored you. You were together for 40 years. When would he have had time for another family?" She had a point. Richard had been devoted, attentive. Yes, he traveled for business, but never for extended periods. We spent holidays together, took vacations, shared our daily lives in countless small ways. How could he possibly have maintained another household, another relationship, without my knowledge? Yet the seed of doubt had been planted. Throughout our marriage, there had been unexplained absences, business trips that seemed to materialize at the last minute, phone calls he took in private. I had never questioned these things, had trusted Richard completely. Had that trust been misplaced? "I need to know the truth," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever it is." "Of course," Margaret agreed. "We'll call Martin, have him look into these claims." But Martin, when we reached him, was already aware of the allegations. "I've been fielding calls from reporters all morning," he told us, sounding harried. This is exactly the kind of distraction Vanessa's team wants. Shift focus from her guilt to Richard's character. "But is it true?" I pressed. Did he have another family?" Martin was silent for a moment. "I don't know, Eleanor. In all the years I handled Richard's affairs, I never saw any indication of such a thing. But I'm looking into it now. I've got investigators tracking down this Catherine Harlow, verifying whether these supposed children exist." "In the meantime," Margaret interjected, "what should Ellie do? The press will be all over this." "Say nothing," Martin advised firmly. "No comments, no reactions. Let them speculate. The truth will come out soon enough." But staying silent proved harder than expected. By afternoon, reporters had gathered at the mansion gates, shouting questions whenever anyone entered or left. My phone rang constantly with calls from unknown numbers, journalists seeking my reaction to the bombshell allegations. I retreated to Richard's study, the one room in the house that still felt truly his, and tried to make sense of what was happening. If Richard had betrayed me in this most fundamental way, What did that mean for our 40 years together? Had any of it been real? Had he ever truly loved me?
No.
I couldn't believe it. Not without proof. Not based on accusations from Vanessa, who had already proven herself capable of unimaginable cruelty and deception. The doorbell rang, its chime echoing through the quiet house. Margaret, who had been making calls in the kitchen, went to answer it. Moments later, she appeared in the study doorway, her expression troubled. "Ellie, there's someone here to see you. She says her name is Catherine Harlow." My heart seemed to stop. The woman from the article, Richard's alleged mistress, was here in my home? "Send her away," I said automatically, fear and anger warring within me. "I tried," Margaret replied, "but she's insistent. Says she has information about Richard that you need to hear. Information that contradicts what's in the papers." That gave me pause. Contradicts the story? What could that mean? "Show her in," I decided, straightening my shoulders. Whatever the truth, I would face it directly. Catherine Harlow was not what I expected. I had imagined a younger woman, glamorous and polished. Everything I was not. Instead, the woman who entered Richard's study was about my age, perhaps a few years younger, with silver-streaked brown hair and a careworn face that spoke of a life that hadn't been easy. "Mrs. Mitchell," she greeted me, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for seeing me. I know this must be difficult." An understatement, if ever there was one. I gestured to the chair opposite Richard's desk, where I sat like a fortress behind solid mahogany. "You claim to have been my husband's mistress," I said, my voice remarkably steady given the turmoil inside me. Catherine shook her head. "No, Mrs. Mitchell. That's what the papers are saying, based on Vanessa's claims. It's not the truth." A flicker of hope ignited within me. "Then what is the truth?" She took a deep breath. "Richard and I did know each other, yes. I worked for his company 35 years ago, as the article said. But we were never lovers, never had a romantic relationship of any kind." "Then why is Vanessa claiming you had children together?" "Because my children, my twins, are Richard's biological children, but not in the way she's implying."
Ist sehr daher. Confusion replacing anger.
"I don't understand." Catherine clasped her hands in her lap, clearly choosing her words carefully. 34 years ago, you and Richard were trying to have a child. You had suffered several miscarriages. Do you remember? I nodded slowly. Those had been dark years, filled with hope repeatedly dashed, with doctor's appointments and treatments and crushing disappointment. "Richard approached me," Catherine continued. "I was young, single, working in his accounting department. He asked if I would consider being a surrogate for you and him. He explained your difficulties, how desperately you wanted a child. He offered a generous financial arrangement, enough to set me up independently afterward." My mind reeled with this revelation. Richard had never mentioned such a plan to me. We had discussed adoption, various fertility treatments, but surrogacy? Never. I agreed, Catherine went on. The procedure was still quite new then, but successful. I became pregnant with twins using Richard's sperm and my egg. The plan was for you to adopt the babies after birth. "But that never happened," I said, still struggling to process what she was telling me. "We never adopted twins. William is our only child, conceived naturally after years of trying." Catherine nodded.
"Yes."
"Because a month into my pregnancy, you became pregnant with William. Naturally, against all odds. Richard was overjoyed. You were finally having the child you dreamed of. But it created a complication regarding our arrangement." "The twins," I murmured, beginning to understand. Richard came to me, explained the situation. He offered me two choices: proceed as planned, with you adopting the twins as siblings for your biological child, or keep the babies myself, with his financial support for as long as necessary. No obligations, no strings attached, and you chose to keep them, I concluded. "I did," she confirmed. By then, I had grown attached to the idea of being a mother. And Richard, he was honorable about it all. He set up a trust for the children's education, made sure we were comfortable without being directly involved in our lives. He wasn't their father in any real sense, just a biological donor who fulfilled his financial obligations. My head spun with the implications. Richard had fathered children with another woman, not through an affair, but through an arrangement he had never disclosed to me, had never even discussed with me.
Why?
Why didn't he tell me? I asked aloud. About the surrogacy arrangement, about the twins? Catherine's expression softened with something like compassion. He was going to, initially, but then you became pregnant with William, and he worried the shock might. He was concerned for your health, for the pregnancy. He decided to wait until after William was born. But he never told me, I said, a note of accusation creeping into my voice. Not in 34 years. No, Catherine agreed. And I can't speak to his reasons for that. All I know is that he kept his word to me, supported the twins throughout their lives, while maintaining his distance as we'd agreed. They knew he was their biological father, but understood he wasn't a parent to them. My late husband filled that role. Your husband knew about this arrangement? She nodded. I met James when the twins were 2. I told him everything before we married. He accepted them as his own, loved them completely. Richard stepped back even further then, limiting his contact to birthday cards and occasional educational gifts. The trust payments continued, but that was the extent of his involvement. I tried to reconcile the story with the man I had known, had loved for 40 years. It seemed impossible that Richard could have kept such a secret, maintained such a deception for decades. And yet it made a certain sense. His unexplained absences, the significant charitable donations to educational causes that sometimes appeared in our tax returns, his particular tenderness after my miscarriages, as if carrying a burden of guilt I couldn't understand. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Because Vanessa found out somehow. She's twisting the truth, using my children to paint Richard as unfaithful, as a liar, to undermine your testimony against her. Catherine leaned forward earnestly. I couldn't let that stand. The twins, Michael and Elizabeth, they've built good lives. They don't deserve to be dragged into this ugly situation, portrayed as products of an affair that never happened. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, of ulterior motives. But all I saw was concern, sincerity, and a certain weary resignation, the look of someone who had kept a difficult secret for a very long time and was finally unburdening herself. Do you have proof? I asked. Of this arrangement, the trust, Richard's involvement? She nodded, reaching into her purse to withdraw a folder. Legal documents, letters from Richard over the years, photos of the twins with their birthday gifts. It's all here. I took the folder with trembling hands, but didn't open it immediately. I wasn't sure I was ready to see tangible evidence of Richard's deception, however well-intentioned it might have been. What do you want from me? I asked instead. Catherine seemed surprised by the question. Nothing, Mrs. Mitchell. I'm not here to make demands or complicate your life further. I simply wanted you to know the truth before Vanessa's version becomes accepted as fact. And the twins? Do they want a relationship? Acknowledgement? A share of Richard's estate? She shook her head firmly.
No.
They're adults now, with lives and families of their own. The trust Richard established has provided well for them. They want no part of his fortune or the public spectacle surrounding his death. They simply want the truth about their origins to be respected. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted slightly. At least I wouldn't have to face demands from these adult children I had never known existed. But the betrayal remained, a deep, aching wound in my understanding of my marriage, my life with Richard. Thank you for coming, I said finally, my voice distant to my own ears. I need time to process this. Catherine rose, understanding in her eyes. Of course. I've left my contact information in the folder if you have questions later. And Mrs. Mitchell, she paused at the door. For what it's worth, Richard spoke of you with great love and respect. Always. After she left, I sat motionless behind Richard's desk, the unopened folder before me like a ticking bomb. Margaret appeared in the doorway, concern etched on her face. Ellie? What did she say? I related Catherine's story in a voice that sounded hollow, detached, as if speaking of strangers rather than my own husband's betrayal. "Oh, Ellie," Margaret murmured when I finished. "What a burden to bear, on top of everything else. Is it true?" I wondered aloud. Or just another manipulation, another lie? "Open the folder," Margaret suggested gently. "See what evidence she's provided." With reluctant hands, I finally opened the folder Catherine had left. Inside were dozens of documents, legal agreements establishing the surrogacy arrangement, the trust documents for the twins' education, letters from Richard on his company stationery, signed with his distinctive signature, and photos. 2 children at various ages, receiving gifts sent by Richard. A boy and girl with Richard's eyes, his smile. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable. Richard had indeed fathered these children, had supported them financially, while keeping their existence secret from me for our entire marriage. "He lied to me," I whispered, a tear sliding down my cheek. "For 40 years, he lied to me." Margaret moved to my side, her hand warm on my shoulder. "He thought he was protecting you, Ellie. By deceiving me? By making decisions about creating children, our children, without even consulting me?" Anger flared suddenly, hot and righteous. What gave him the right? Who was he to decide I couldn't handle the truth? "I'm not defending him," Margaret said carefully. "But people sometimes make terrible choices for what they believe are good reasons." "Good reasons," I repeated bitterly. Like William believing he had good reasons for concealing Richard's murder? For trying to have me declared incompetent? This family has a pattern, it seems, men making choices for my own good, without bothering to include me in the decision. The parallel struck me forcefully. William had inherited more than Richard's eyes and smile. He had inherited his father's paternalistic certainty that he knew what was best for me, that my feelings and autonomy were secondary to his judgment. "What will you do about Vanessa's claims?" Margaret asked, bringing me back to the immediate problem. "The press is running with the affair story." I drew a deep breath, forcing myself to think beyond my personal pain to the practical reality. Vanessa was using this revelation to attack Richard's character, to undermine my credibility, to create sympathy for herself as the wronged party. I couldn't allow that manipulation to succeed, regardless of my feelings about Richard's deception. "I'll tell the truth," I decided. "Not through the press, but in court. I'll testify about what Catherine has told me, present her evidence. Show that while Richard kept secrets, he wasn't unfaithful, wasn't living a double life as Vanessa claims." "Are you sure?" Margaret asked. "That means making this private matter very public." "Vanessa has already made it public," I pointed out. "At least my version will be the truth, not her twisted interpretation." The decision made, I called Martin Goldsmith to inform him of Catherine's visit and the evidence she had provided. He was silent for a long moment after I finished speaking. "You knew," I realized suddenly. "You knew about the twins." Another pause. "Yes," he admitted finally. "I helped Richard establish the trust, reviewed the legal agreements. He swore me to secrecy as his attorney. And as his friend?" I pressed, a new hurt blooming. "Did you advise him to keep this from me for 40 years? "I advised him to tell you from the beginning," Martin said quietly. "Every time the subject arose, I told him secrecy would only compound the problem. But Richard, he convinced himself it was better this way, that knowing would only cause you pain." "Well, he was right about that," I said bitterly. "It has caused me pain, just decades later than necessary and compounded by betrayal." After speaking with Martin, I retreated to the garden, the one space in the house that felt truly mine, untainted by revelations and betrayals. As I sat on the stone bench beneath the old oak tree, surrounded by the roses I had tenderly cultivated for decades, I tried to reconcile the Richard the First had loved with the man who had kept such a monumental secret. Had I ever really known him? Had our marriage been built on deception from the very beginning? Or was this one terrible lapse in judgment, however extended, in an otherwise loving and honest relationship? I didn't know. And Richard, with his secrets and justifications, was beyond questioning now. Night fell as I sat in the garden, lost in memories and recriminations. Only when Margaret came searching for me, worried by my long absence, did I realize how late it had grown. "You need to eat something," she insisted, leading me back to the house. "And rest. Tomorrow we'll deal with the press, with Vanessa's accusations. But tonight, just take care of yourself." I allowed her to guide me inside, to prepare a simple meal I barely tasted, to send me to bed with gentle but firm instructions to try to sleep. But sleep eluded me. I lay awake for hours, my mind churning with questions without answers, with anger and grief, and a profound sense of betrayal. Sometime in the darkest hours of the night, exhaustion finally claimed me. I fell into a fitful sleep filled with dreams of Richard, not as he had been at the end, but as the young man I had married, earnest and ambitious and so certain he knew what was best for everyone around him. Morning brought no clarity, no resolution to my tangled emotions. But it did bring a new development, a call from the district attorney, Helen Patel. "Mrs. Mitchell," she greeted me, her voice unusually gentle. "I understand you've been made aware of Vanessa's claims about your late husband's personal life." "Yes," I confirmed. "And I've met with Catherine Harlow. I know the truth about the twins." "I see." She sounded relieved. "Then you understand Vanessa is attempting to create a narrative that undermines your credibility and generates sympathy for herself."
"Ido."
"And I'm prepared to testify about the real arrangement between Richard and Ms. Harlow." "That's good to hear," Ms. Patel said. "But there's something else you should know. Our investigation into Vanessa's claims has uncovered additional information. It appears she's been in contact with Gregory Townsend despite both being in custody. We believe they're coordinating their defense strategies." This wasn't entirely surprising. Vanessa and Townsend had been co-conspirators from the beginning. But how were they managing to communicate while incarcerated? "They've been passing messages through Vanessa's new attorney," Ms. Patel explained. "We've intercepted several. And Mrs. Mitchell, some of these messages suggest they have more plans to discredit you before the trial." A chill ran through me. What kind of plans? We're not entirely sure yet. But given what they've already done with the Catherine Harlow situation, I wanted to warn you to be prepared for more revelations, more attempts to undermine your reputation and testimony. After the call ended, I sat in Richard's study, trying to imagine what other secrets might be lurking in my husband's past, what other bombs Vanessa might be preparing to drop. The twins had been shocking enough. What else could there be? I didn't have to wait long to find out. That afternoon, as I was reviewing trust documents with Martin, Margaret burst into the study, tablet in hand. "You need to see this," she said grimly, placing the tablet before me. It just broke online. The headline made my blood run cold. "Mitchell murder case. Secret recordings reveal widow knew of husband's double life." The article claimed Vanessa had provided recordings of conversations between William and me, allegedly proving I had known about Richard's affair and second family all along, had even used the knowledge to extract financial concessions from him throughout our marriage. "This is absurd," I sputtered, reading the outlandish claims. "I never knew about the twins until yesterday, and I certainly never blackmailed Richard about anything." "Of course it's absurd," Martin agreed, reading over my shoulder. "But Vanessa is desperate. She's facing a murder charge with overwhelming evidence against her. Her only play is to destroy your credibility, paint you as a liar and manipulator." "But recordings?" I pressed. What recordings could she possibly have? The answer came further down in the article. The so-called evidence consisted of surveillance footage from the hidden cameras Vanessa and William had installed throughout the mansion, footage that had been selectively edited to make innocent conversations appear sinister. "They're manipulating the videos," Martin realized, taking snippets of dialogue out of context to support their narrative. "Can they do that?" I asked, appalled. "Use illegally obtained recordings as evidence?"
"No, Martin assured me."
No court would admit such evidence. But Vanessa doesn't care about the court of law right now. She's playing to the court of public opinion, creating doubt, sympathy, muddying the waters before her trial. It was a clever strategy, I had to admit. Even if these manufactured revelations never made it into the courtroom, they could influence potential jurors, shape public perception of the case, and cause me immense personal distress in the process. So, what do we do? I asked, looking between Martin and Margaret. How do we fight this? We go on the offensive, Martin decided. No more dignified silence. We hold a press conference, present Catherine Harlow and her evidence, expose Vanessa's manipulations for what they are. A press conference? I echoed, anxiety blooming in my chest. I don't know if I can. You can, Margaret said firmly, squeezing my hand. You've testified in court against your own son. You've faced down Vanessa and Townsend. You can certainly handle a few reporters. She was right, of course. After everything I had endured, a press conference should be manageable. Yet the thought of publicly discussing Richard's deception, of exposing our private business to the world's scrutiny, made me physically ill. But what choice did I have? Vanessa had forced this confrontation, had dragged my marriage and Richard's memory through the mud. I couldn't allow her lies to stand unchallenged. All right, I agreed reluctantly. When? Tomorrow morning, Martin said decisively. The sooner we counter these allegations, the better. I'll arrange everything. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Martin drafted a statement for me to deliver. Catherine Harlow agreed to attend the press conference to confirm her story directly to the media. The district attorney's office provided documentation of the intercepted messages between Vanessa and Townsend, demonstrating their coordinated campaign to discredit me. By the time I stood before the assembled reporters in the conference room of Martin's law firm, I felt a strange calm descend over me. The initial shock and hurt of Richard's deception had given way to a cold, clear anger, not just at him, but at Vanessa and William and everyone else who had conspired to control my life, to make decisions for my own good, without my input or consent. No more. From this moment forward, I would take control of my own narrative, my own destiny. Good morning, I began, my voice steady as I addressed the sea of expectant faces. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. 3 months ago, my husband Richard was murdered by my daughter-in-law, Vanessa Mitchell, who then conspired with my son William to conceal her crime and seize control of our assets. These are not allegations or accusations. They are established facts, supported by video evidence, witness testimony, and my son's own guilty plea. I paused, allowing the gravity of these statements to sink in before continuing. Recently, Vanessa Mitchell has attempted to divert attention from her crimes by making salacious claims about my late husband's personal life. She has alleged that Richard maintained a second family for decades, that he led a double life of deception and betrayal. While crafted to create maximum damage to Richard's reputation and my credibility, these allegations contain a grain of truth twisted beyond recognition. Murmurs rippled through the assembled journalists. I pressed on, determined to maintain control of the narrative. The truth is this. 34 years ago, after I had suffered several miscarriages, Richard arranged for a surrogate to carry a child for us using his sperm. The surrogate was Catherine Harlow, who is here with me today. Before the children, twins as it happened, were born, I became pregnant naturally with our son William. Richard and Ms. Harlow then modified their agreement, with Richard providing financial support for the twins while Ms. Harlow raised them independently. I took a deep breath before delivering the most painful admission. I did not know about this arrangement until yesterday, when Ms. Harlow came forward in response to Vanessa's distorted version of events. Yes, Richard kept this secret from me throughout our marriage. Yes, this revelation has been painful and shocking. But it was not, as Vanessa claims, an affair or a second family in the conventional sense. It was a surrogacy arrangement that Richard, for reasons of his own, chose not to disclose to me. Reporters began shouting questions, but I held up a hand to silence them. Regarding the alleged recordings Vanessa claims to possess, showing that I knew about this arrangement all along, these are manipulations. Selective edits of illegally obtained surveillance footage from cameras Vanessa and William installed in our home. The district attorney's office has confirmed that Vanessa and her co-conspirator, Gregory Townsend, have been coordinating this smear campaign from jail, passing messages through intermediaries. I gestured to Martin, who distributed copies of the intercepted messages to the front row of journalists. I am not here to defend Richard's decision to keep the surrogacy arrangement secret. That was a betrayal of trust for which he can no longer answer. But I am here to set the record straight, to prevent Vanessa Mitchell from further twisting the truth in an attempt to escape accountability for her crimes. I stepped back from the podium, allowing Catherine Harlow to speak next, confirming everything I had said about the surrogacy arrangement and presenting her documentation. Martin followed with a detailed explanation of the legal implications of Vanessa's actions, including the potential for additional charges related to witness tampering and evidence manipulation. When the formal statements concluded, I braced myself for questions. They came in a rapid-fire barrage, some respectful, others probing for sensational details or emotional reactions. Mrs. Mitchell, will you be seeking a relationship with your husband's biological children? That is a private matter I'm not prepared to discuss today. Do you believe your son William knew about the twins? I have no evidence that he did, but given recent events, I can no longer speak with certainty about what William did or didn't know. How do you feel about your husband's deception? This question, asked by a young woman in the front row, gave me pause. How did I feel? The answer was too complex, too raw, for a press conference. But some response was necessary. I feel that my husband made a terrible error in judgment, I said carefully. He thought he was protecting me, but secrecy is rarely protective in the long run. If there's a lesson here, perhaps it's that truth, however difficult, is preferable to well-intentioned deception. By the time the press conference ended, I was emotionally exhausted but satisfied that we had effectively countered Vanessa's narrative. The media coverage that followed was largely sympathetic to my position, portraying Vanessa's claims as the desperate maneuvers of a woman facing overwhelming evidence of her guilt. But Vanessa wasn't finished. 2 days later, a package arrived at the mansion by courier, addressed to me personally with no return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a handwritten note. Eleanor, by now you know about the twins, but there's more Richard kept from you. So much more. This drive contains everything, his other secrets, his other betrayals. Watch it alone. When you've seen it all, ask yourself, was your testimony really honest? Did you know your husband at all? Would you still stand by your version of events if the world knew everything on this drive? This is your last chance to reconsider before my trial. Withdraw your testimony, claim confusion or misunderstanding about what you saw on the recording of Richard's death. Do this, and these secrets stay buried. Refuse, and I release everything to the media the week before trial. Your choice. I stared at the USB drive, dread coiling in my stomach. More secrets? More betrayals? What else had Richard hidden from me throughout our decades together? My first instinct was to call Martin, to turn the drive over to the district attorney's office without viewing its contents. But curiosity and fear overrode caution. What if there was something truly damaging on this drive? Something that would not only further tarnish Richard's memory, but somehow implicate me? I had to know. That evening, after Margaret had gone home, I took the USB drive to Richard's study and plugged it into his computer. The drive contained a single video file, labeled simply Watch. With trembling fingers, I clicked the file. The video began to play. It opened with footage of Richard in his study, from the hidden cameras, obviously, speaking on the phone, his expression grave. Yes, I understand the risks, he was saying. But I've made my decision. The transfers need to happen tomorrow, before anyone realizes what's happening. The scene shifted to Richard and William in the same study, clearly in the midst of a heated argument. You can't do this, Dad, William was saying, his face flushed with anger. It's not just illegal, it's wrong. I'm protecting our family, Richard insisted, making sure Eleanor is taken care of no matter what. By committing fraud? By moving millions offshore? Do you have any idea what would happen if this got out? The conversation continued in this vein, with Richard defending some kind of financial impropriety while William objected on both legal and moral grounds. Without context, it was difficult to understand exactly what they were discussing, but the implication was clear. Richard had been involved in some kind of financial wrongdoing. The video continued with more snippets of conversations. all seemingly selected to portray Richard as dishonest, manipulative, even criminal. But something felt off about the whole presentation. The cuts between scenes were abrupt, the context limited, the conversations oddly disjointed. Then it hit me. This was exactly what Martin had described regarding the recordings Vanessa had released to the media. Selective edits of surveillance footage, arranged to create a damning narrative without proper context. I paused the video, suspicion growing. Was this another manipulation? Another attempt to undermine my faith in Richard, to make me doubt my own testimony? There was only one way to find out. I needed to see the original, unedited footage from which these clips had been taken. The police had confiscated the computer that stored all the surveillance footage, but I realized there might be backups elsewhere in the house. William and Vanessa would have been too careful to rely on a single copy of their valuable recordings. I began searching methodically, starting with William's former bedroom and working outward. In the back of his closet, behind a panel I had never noticed before, I found what I was looking for, a small safe containing multiple hard drives, all neatly labeled by date. Getting into the safe proved surprisingly easy. The combination was William's birth date, predictable and sentimental. Inside, I found not only the hard drives but a notebook containing timestamps and notes about particularly useful recordings. Using this notebook as a guide, I was able to locate the original footage from which Vanessa had created her manipulative compilation. And as I suspected, the full recordings told a very different story. The phone call where Richard discussed transfers and risks was about moving investments to more stable funds during a market downturn, perfectly legal, prudent financial management. The argument with William wasn't about offshore accounts or fraud, but about William's reckless spending and Richard's decision to place more of the family assets in trust rather than leaving them outright to William, a decision that, in retrospect, had been prescient. Clip after clip, I found the context that transformed seemingly sinister conversations into ordinary business discussions, family disagreements, or benign administrative matters. By the time I finished reviewing the original footage, it was past midnight. But I felt a profound sense of relief. Vanessa's evidence of Richard's misdeeds was nothing but clever editing and deliberate misrepresentation. While the revelation about the twins remained painful, this additional attempt to tarnish Richard's character and manipulate me had failed. The next morning, I called Martin and the district attorney, informing them of Vanessa's attempted blackmail and turning over both her note and all the evidence I had found. Ms. Patel was particularly interested in the notebook, which contained direct evidence of Vanessa and William's conspiracy to manipulate surveillance footage. "This is witness tampering and attempted blackmail," she confirmed. "We'll be adding these charges to the case against Vanessa. And this notebook." She held it up, satisfied. "This directly ties William to the surveillance operation, supports our case that he was a knowing participant in the conspiracy from the beginning." "Will it affect his plea deal?" I asked, uncertain how I felt about the possibility of a longer sentence for my son. "Possibly," Ms. Patel acknowledged. "It depends on whether the judge views this as new information that would have materially affected the original agreement. We'll have to see." In the weeks that followed, life settled into a strange, new rhythm. The press coverage of Vanessa's failed blackmail attempt had garnered me unexpected public sympathy. People who had viewed me simply as a wealthy widow were now seeing me as a woman who had endured extraordinary betrayal, yet remained standing, determined to see justice done. I received letters from strangers sharing their own stories of deception and resilience. Invitations to speak at women's groups, to write a memoir, to participate in documentaries about the case. I declined most of these, uninterested in extending my time in the public eye, but their arrival marked a shift in how the world perceived me, no longer just a victim, but a survivor. As February approached, bringing Vanessa's trial date closer, I prepared once more to testify, not just about Richard's murder now, but about the elaborate conspiracy that had followed, the attempts to discredit me, the manipulated evidence. The case against her had only grown stronger with each desperate attempt she had made to escape accountability. A week before the trial was scheduled to begin, Martin called with unexpected news. "Vanessa's attorney has approached the DA with a plea offer," he told me. She'll plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of 20 to 25 years. Why now? I asked, surprised by this sudden capitulation after months of defiance. The additional charges for witness tampering and blackmail have strengthened the prosecution's hand considerably. And frankly, her defense strategy of attacking Richard's character and your credibility has backfired spectacularly. Public opinion has turned decisively against her. What does the DA think of the offer? She's inclined to accept it, with your blessing. It guarantees a conviction without the uncertainty of a trial, and the sentence is substantial. Vanessa would be in her 60s before she's eligible for parole. I considered the offer carefully. A plea deal would spare me the ordeal of another public testimony, another dissection of Richard's murder, and the painful aftermath. It would provide certainty, closure. Yet part of me wanted Vanessa to face a jury, to have her crimes laid bare in the full light of a public trial. I need to think about it, I told Martin. That evening, I visited William in prison for the first time since his sentencing. It was a decision I had struggled with for months, uncertain whether I could face my son after everything that had happened. But with Vanessa's plea offer on the table, I felt a need for resolution, for answers only William could provide. The visiting room was stark and institutional, a far cry from the luxurious surroundings William had grown up in. He entered hesitantly, clearly surprised by my presence. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, and new lines had etched themselves around his eyes and mouth. 5 months in prison had aged him visibly. "Mom," he greeted me, his voice rough with emotion. "I didn't think you'd come." "Neither did I admitted as we sat across from each other at the metal table. "But here I am." An awkward silence stretched between us, weighted with all that had happened, all that could never be unsaid or undone. "Vanessa has offered a plea deal," I finally said, watching his reaction carefully. William's expression hardened. "Of course she has. Now that her schemes have failed, now that she's facing the consequences, she looks for the easy way out. That's Vanessa." "You would know," I observed, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "You married her after all. Chose her over your family." He flinched, but didn't deny it. "I was blind," he said quietly, "to who she really was, to what she was capable of. I thought." He trailed off, shaking his head. "You thought what?" I pressed. "I thought she loved me," he admitted, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "Stupid, right? She never loved me. She loved what I represented, access to Dad's fortune, to the lifestyle she felt she deserved. And I was so desperate for her approval, so determined to prove I was worthy of her, that I didn't see it until it was too late." His self-awareness surprised me. I had expected excuses, deflection, the same manipulative tactics he had employed throughout this ordeal. But prison, it seemed, had forced a reckoning of sorts. "Did you know?" I asked the question that had haunted me since discovering the surveillance footage of Richard's death. "Did you know she was planning to kill your father?" William met my gaze directly for the first time. "No," he said firmly. "I swear to you, Mom. I didn't know what she was planning. I knew she was frustrated by Dad's control of the company, by the restrictions on our access to the family money. But murder?
No.
I never imagined she would go that far." I studied his face, trying to discern truth from deception. After decades of believing I knew my son, only to discover how thoroughly he had betrayed me, could I trust anything he said now? "What about the twins?" I asked, changing direction. "Did you know about them? About Catherine Harlow?" Surprise flickered across his features. "The twins? You mean Michael and Elizabeth?" So he had known. Another betrayal. Another secret kept from me. "Yes, I knew," William confirmed, seeing the realization in my face. "Dad told me when I was in college. He thought I should know about my half-siblings in case something happened to both of you and they needed support." "But you never told me," I said, the familiar hurt resurfacing. "Even after he died, even when you had nothing to lose by telling me the truth." William looked down at his hands. "It wasn't my secret to tell, Mom. Dad had his reasons for keeping it from you. It wasn't my place to second-guess that decision." "His reasons," I repeated bitterly. Always his reasons, his judgment, his decisions about what I could or couldn't handle. He thought he was protecting you, William offered, echoing Margaret's words from weeks before. I don't need protection. The words burst from me with unexpected force. I never did. What I needed, what I deserved, was honesty. Respect for my intelligence, my strength, my right to make informed choices about my own life. William blinked, startled by my vehemence. Then, slowly, he nodded. You're right, he said simply. Dad was wrong to keep the truth from you. And I was wrong to go along with it, to perpetuate the deception.
I'm sorry, Mum.
For that and for everything. The apology hung in the air between us, inadequate, yet somehow necessary. It couldn't erase the past, couldn't heal the wounds his betrayal had inflicted. But it was a beginning, perhaps, an acknowledgement, at least, of the harm that had been done. Should I accept Vanessa's plea deal? I asked, returning to the purpose of my visit. Or push for a trial? William considered the question carefully. She deserves the maximum sentence possible, he said eventually. But a trial would be brutal for you, Mom. The press, the public scrutiny, having to relive Dad's murder in excruciating detail. He shook his head. If the DA thinks the plea deal is fair, I'd take it. End this chapter and move forward with your life. Move forward. The concept seemed both tantalizing and impossible. How did one move forward from such profound betrayal, such shattering loss? Yet what was the alternative? To remain forever trapped in this nightmare, defined by what had been done to me rather than by my own choices, my own resilience? Thank you for your honesty, I said as our visiting time drew to a close. It's refreshing. A sad smile crossed William's face. Too little, too late, I know. But for what it's worth, I am sorry, Mom. Not just for getting caught, not just for the consequences. For the choices I made, for the pain I caused you. As I left the prison, winter sunlight glinting off the razor wires surrounding the facility, I felt something shift within me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward understanding. William had made terrible choices, had betrayed me in ways I might never fully recover from. But he was also a victim of sorts, of his own insecurities, of Vanessa's manipulation, of Richard's well-intentioned but ultimately destructive pattern of secrecy and control. The next morning, I called the district attorney and accepted Vanessa's plea offer. 2 days later, in a courtroom far less crowded than the one where she would have been tried, Vanessa Mitchell pleaded guilty to the second-degree murder of Richard Mitchell. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after serving 20. I was present for the plea and sentencing, seated in the back of the courtroom, watching as the woman who had destroyed my family, murdered my husband, and nearly succeeded in stealing everything from me was led away in handcuffs. Vanessa glanced back once, her eyes meeting mine with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive in its intensity. I held her gaze steadily until she was gone, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered on the steps, shouting questions as I emerged. For once, I decided to speak directly rather than through Martin or a prepared statement. Justice has been served today, I told the assembled cameras. Not perfectly, perhaps, but adequately. Richard's killer will spend decades in prison. My focus now is on honoring his memory by living the life he would have wanted for me, one of purpose, dignity, and truth. As the weeks passed and the media attention gradually subsided, I began the long process of rebuilding. Not just the physical spaces of my home, now restored to a careful balance of cherished memories and fresh beginnings, but the emotional landscape of my life as well. I met with Catherine Harlow again, and eventually with the twins, Michael and Elizabeth. Our conversations were cautious at first, weighted with the complexity of our unexpected connection. But over time, a tentative relationship began to form. Not family in the conventional sense, but something unique to our unusual circumstances. They shared stories of the birthday gifts Richard had sent over the years, the encouraging notes that had accompanied their educational milestones. I found comfort in these glimpses of the man I had loved, evidence that despite his deception, there had been care and responsibility in his actions. The scholarship fund Richard had established in his will became my primary focus. Working with Martin, I expanded its scope, creating opportunities not just for academic achievement, but for students who had overcome significant adversity, a category I now understood more intimately than I ever could have imagined. I visited William monthly, watching as he worked through his own process of reckoning and redemption. Our relationship would never be what it once was, the easy trust of mother and child irreparably damaged. But something new was emerging in its place, a more honest connection, perhaps, founded on the hard truths we had both been forced to confront. On the anniversary of Richard's death, I stood alone in his study, now transformed into a space that honored his memory while accommodating my new reality. The leather chair remained, as did his books and collections. But I had added my own touches, my gardening journals on the shelves beside his business volumes, fresh flowers on the desk where once only papers had been permitted. I've learned a lot this year, Richard, I said aloud to the empty room. About you. About William. About myself most of all. I moved to the window, looking out at the garden where spring was beginning to assert itself, new growth pushing through soil still cold from winter. I loved you, I continued, my voice steady, with all my heart, for 40 years. But I didn't always know you, did I? You kept parts of yourself hidden, thinking it was for the best. Thinking I needed protection rather than partnership. The setting sun cast long shadows across the lawn, a visual echo of how Richard's secrets had extended far beyond his life, shaping the aftermath in ways he could never have anticipated. I'm not angry anymore, I realized as I spoke the words. Not about the twins, not about the deception. I understand why you made the choices you did, even if I don't agree with them. But I've learned something important from all of this, something I wish you had learned too. Secrecy doesn't protect the people we love. It only creates distance, builds walls where there should be understanding. I turned from the window, surveying the study one last time before switching off the light. Goodbye, Richard, I said softly. I'm ready now, ready to live my life, not as your widow, not as William's mother, but as Eleanor, just Eleanor, on my own terms, with my eyes wide open. As I closed the study door behind me, I felt not an ending but a beginning, the first day of a life reclaimed, redefined by my own choices rather than by the betrayals I had suffered. The path ahead was uncertain, the future unwritten. But for the first time in decades, that uncertainty felt like freedom rather than fear. I was no longer the woman who had been betrayed by blood. I was the woman who had survived it, who had emerged stronger, wiser, and finally, truly my own.